The nightclub's background music filled the air as a waitress unsuccessfully tried to explain the most expensive options on the menu. The customer couldn't have cared less. With his feet kicked up on a table already lined with bottles, he cut her off mid-sentence and ordered everything on the list. The girl froze, confused by the absurd request. That hesitation was enough to destroy what little patience the man had left. Hating to waste time, he took things to the next level. He demanded that the club's entire alcohol stock be handed out to everyone inside. Thinking it had to be a joke, the waitress made the mistake of asking him to stop messing around. The guy instantly snapped. He grabbed her arm with brutal force, shattering any friendly atmosphere, and shoved a black card into her hand, making it crystal clear that he didn't tolerate jokes. After letting go of the frightened employee, he stomped over to a couch. He sat down like he owned the place and spread his arms wide, taking complete control of the room while preparing to bring up the only thing that really mattered. With his arms stretched out, he dropped the announcement that brought the entire club to a halt. Tonight's bill was on him. Shock swept through the crowd. Nobody understood what he was doing until he revealed the one condition attached to the party. No one was allowed to leave while there was still a single drop of alcohol left in stock. Chaos erupted. A wave of women rushed toward his couch, thrilled by the display of money and power. Within seconds, he became the center of attention. On the other side of the room, the guys burned with jealousy, watching the scene unfold and wondering how some random dude had suddenly become the king of the party. The reality, however, was nothing like it appeared. He wasn't a billionaire or a tycoon, just an ordinary college freshman still trying to understand how he had somehow become a machine built to burn through money. The answer to that madness lay in what had happened 6 hours earlier. Just before midnight, Siley was walking alone through a poorly lit park. The silence vanished when the aggressive roar of an engine tore through the night. A yellow vehicle appeared at high speed, heading straight toward him without any sign of slowing down. By the time the young man realized what was happening, the blinding headlights had already swallowed his vision. Acting purely on instinct, Siley threw himself out of the way to save his life. His body slammed against the freezing pavement and rolled several yards, narrowly escaping being run over and ending up sprawled on the ground with his clothes completely torn apart. Lying on the asphalt covered in dirt, Siley boiled with anger. He looked up to assess the damage and saw the front of the vehicle completely smashed into a patch of bushes. Ignoring the wrecked car, he shouted toward the driver's seat, making it clear that he was only still breathing thanks to pure reflexes. His anger vanished the moment the door opened. A woman stumbled out of the wreckage, visibly injured and dressed in a blue dress. Shock replaced his fury. Swallowing his complaints, he asked if she needed help and pulled out his phone to call emergency services. Before he could dial the number, the stranger charged at him like a freight train. She threw herself on top of Siley with her full weight, knocking the phone from his hand. Without the slightest bit of context, she blurted out a ridiculous offer. She would pay $1 million for his phone. The young man froze, trying to process that level of insanity. Just as quickly as she had attacked, the woman suddenly backed away. Muttering frantically that she couldn't put a price on it, she turned around and marched back toward the wrecked car. Siley remained on the ground, trying to figure out whether the crash had fried her brain or if she was simply drunk out of her mind. The answer came in the worst possible way. The driver charged at him again, but this time a flash of steel sliced through the darkness. She was holding a knife. The boy panicked, desperately begging her to calm down. Completely unhinged, the woman demanded to buy his hand at any cost, leaving Siley frozen in pure terror. Siley curled up on the pavement, struggling in desperation while his attacker kept the blade pointed at him. Tears streamed down her face as she begged for forgiveness, confessing that everything happening was completely beyond her control. With nowhere left to run, the boy covered his face and waited for the fatal strike. The attack, however, never came. A bizarre force froze the woman in midair. Within seconds, her hands began to disintegrate, melting into a glowing crimson mist. The knife fell with a metallic clang, bouncing across the ground before coming to a stop at the young man's feet. As the woman stared in shock at her own limbs vanishing, another figure suddenly appeared behind her in the blink of an eye. The stranger wore a sadistic smile. In a mocking tone, he questioned the girl's choices and the value of the life belonging to the boy lying on the ground. Terror consumed the woman. Trembling violently, she could barely stammer the newcomer's name. Cold and calculating, the man reminded her of his previous warnings. Her irresponsibility and repeated failures had led her straight to ruin. Desperate, she swore she could still finish the job. He ignored every excuse, snapped his fingers, and delivered the final sentence, claiming he had neither the patience nor the time to waste on her anymore. The red mist exploded outward, swallowing the woman whole. An inhuman scream tore through the night as her eyes darkened into into empty black voids. Her body was completely devoured by the sinister magic right in front of Siley, who watched the brutal execution from the ground, overwhelmed by absolute terror. Frozen in shock, Siley watched the woman turn to dust before his eyes. The moment the strange mist disappeared, the killer fixed his gaze on the boy. With the indifference of someone throwing away trash, the man made it clear that witnesses never left alive. He glanced toward the sky for a brief moment and, without hesitation, demanded the young man's final words. The boy's mind nearly short-circuited. He had no idea who this man was or why he had been sentenced to die. Panic hit him hard. The stranger raised his weapon for the finishing blow. Acting on pure survival instinct, Siley dropped to his knees and begged for a single minute. His voice trembling, he played the only card he had left. He offered to finish the dead woman's mission himself. Catching his breath and slowly rising to his feet, the boy pieced everything together out loud. He concluded that the female driver had simply run out of time. The executioner stopped, visibly impressed that his target's brain was still functioning in the middle of such chaos. As the young man continued pushing for a deal, the killer flashed a sadistic grin and asked why he should bother sparing his life. Siley went straight to the point. With the girl's death, the mysterious black card now needed a new servant. The mention of the object instantly changed the atmosphere. The man's smile vanished. He shot forward like lightning, pressing his face inches from the boy's. With wide eyes and a completely disturbed expression, he demanded to know how Siley knew about the artifact. Instead of shrinking back, the man's unhinged reaction revealed the opening Siley needed. Swallowing his fear and clenching his fists, the young man found his determination and seized control of the situation, ready to confront his enemy with confidence. The boy played his final card boldly. He promised to reveal everything once he completed the mission. If he failed, the enemy would be free to finish him off. That reckless courage drew a laugh from the executioner, who decided to play along. With a quick motion, a flash of light sliced through the darkness, and a black bank card materialized in midair. The object floated into the boy's hands, leaving a glowing trail behind it. The man laid out the rules with no room for mistakes. The balance on the card was $5 million. Siley froze when he heard the absurd amount, but the ultimatum came immediately afterward. He had exactly 6 hours to spend every cent at a designated location. If he failed, death was guaranteed. The task sounded far too easy, immediately raising a red flag in the young man's mind. The killer noticed his suspicion and warned him that the fortune came with hidden traps. It would be up to the target to be fast and clever enough to survive. As the sinister figure was swallowed by the shadows, he vanished, promising to return and claim Siley's life if the balance wasn't reduced to zero. Left alone with the night and his ticket to happiness, time flew by. Hours later, dawn was already approaching. It was past 5 in the morning, and the nightclub was nearly empty. Sunk into a luxurious couch, the boy completely ignored the women surrounding him. Desperation consumed his thoughts because the deadline was only minutes away, and the mountain of money still seemed impossible to spend. The waitress unloaded the remaining stock onto the table, smiling proudly at a job well done. Siley, however, scanned the bottles and felt panic hit him all over again. When she handed him the bill and the total came in far below what he needed, he completely lost it. Consumed by frustration, the young man shoved the employee to the floor and demanded more products. Terrified, the woman explained that the bar was completely dry, with nothing left, not even tea. He yelled for any food they still had available, only to hear the worst answer possible. The place was tiny, and even buying the entire menu wouldn't come close to reaching his goal. The merciless clock on his phone showed only 5 minutes remaining. Panic completely took over his mind. When the waitress suggested that he try another location, he snapped, accusing her of trying to throw him out. Cold sweat covered his body as he grabbed his hair, desperately searching for a way out. The idea of buying items for the women in the club lasted only a second before the fear of a brutal death stopped him from trying to exploit the rules. Out of options, he snatched the receipt from the waitress's hands and racked his brain for a way to burn through the remaining $2 million before time ran out. Just hearing that amount left the employee frozen in shock. His confession that he still needed to spend over $2 million was interrupted by a disturbance at the entrance. 3 rough-looking men stormed into the club, instantly killing the mood and drawing suspicious stares from the remaining customers. The leader of the trio, radiating arrogance, demanded to know what the establishment had to offer. Instead of backing down, the waitress stood her ground. Feeling protected by the supposed millionaire funding the entire night, she confronted the intruders without a trace of fear. Her aggressive attitude worked, causing one of the thugs to quietly suggest to his boss that they should leave while they still could. The tension was suddenly shattered by a violent crash. Siley had smashed a chair against the floor. The young man had entered a state of absolute fury. Moving frantically, he began destroying every piece of furniture he could get his hands on while calling on the crowd to do the same. His insane plan centered entirely on destruction. Since there was no inventory left to purchase, he would cause catastrophic property damage and simply pay for the losses instead. As he wrecked everything in sight, he shouted for the waitress to add the value of every destroyed item to the receipt. The woman could do nothing but stare in stunned silence at this bizarre and desperate method of burning through a fortune. The chaotic frenzy eventually took its toll. The scene abruptly shifted to the first rays of morning sunlight. Lying on the cold pavement of a random street, Siley was completely exhausted and out of options. The clock struck exactly 6 o'clock. The deadline for the macabre mission had arrived, and the boy no longer had a shred of strength left to fight for his fate. A sharp sound cut through the silence of the street. The mysterious man emerged from the shadows once again, laughing at the pitiful state of the boy lying on the ground. Without wasting time, he demanded the results of the impossible mission. Had the $5 million disappeared or not? Exhausted, the young man slowly raised a trembling hand. In it were the black card and a crumpled receipt he had taken from the waitress hours earlier. Somewhere between desperation and complete exhaustion, he explained that he needed that wrinkled piece of paper as proof of the destruction so he wouldn't be executed by the rules of the game. His mental fatigue had grown so overwhelming that he openly admitted he no longer cared whether he survived or not. The executioner, however, wasn't interested in an easy surrender. Wanting to squeeze every last drop of terror from his prey, he raised his sharpened weapon and pointed it directly at the boy's skull. Siley could do nothing except curl up and cover his face, waiting for the final strike. But the blade stopped in midair. The assassin froze instantly, as if invisible vibrations had reached him, like he was listening to a secret message from somewhere beyond. His initial surprise quickly turned into submission. He listened carefully before nodding his head, silently agreeing to the unseen command. When the man turned his attention back to the boy, he was practically foaming with rage. He declared that almost none of the expenses had any real proof behind them, and accused the young man of trying to scam his way out with a fake receipt. Having zero tolerance for tricksters, he snapped his fingers in fury. The terrifying red mist erupted from the ground and swallowed the boy whole. A brutal death seemed like the obvious outcome, but the execution took a bizarre turn. The assassin grumbled that some dark entity had apparently taken pity on him. Instead of tearing his flesh apart, the bloody magic flooded his body with unbearable pain and indescribable sensations before fading into thin air. The young man remained completely intact, frozen in place as he struggled to understand how he had escaped death only to receive such a ridiculous punishment. Still dazed, the boy tried to process the strange penalty he had been given. The realization hit him in the worst possible way. As he reached up and touched his head, he discovered that he was completely bald. The executioner let out a malicious laugh and, in a chilling tone, officially welcomed him as the newest slave of the shadows. 5 days passed after the night that changed his life. The setting now reeked of luxury. Inside a high-end spa, the young man relaxed in an expensive recliner while burning through his latest financial quota. The game was still going, and the current rule required him to spend an absurd amount of money every week. Without hesitation, he handed over the dark artifact to pay for the most expensive treatments available, making sure the money disappeared from the account. The staff thanked him for his generosity before leaving the room. Despite living like a millionaire, peace was nowhere to be found in his mind. The fear of making a fatal mistake or accidentally breaking some hidden rule consumed him from the inside. Every moment of silence brought back the memory of the assassin's sinister smile, pushing him closer and closer to the edge. As if his desperation had summoned him, the shadowy figure materialized out of nowhere. Floating in the air with pure mockery written across his face, the man broke the silence by calling the boy a rat. The scare was brutal. Siley shouted in panic, staring at the threat and demanding to know why he had suddenly appeared. In the blink of an eye, Siley collapsed onto the floor, convinced that his time had finally come. The dark messenger, however, looked completely bored. Making himself comfortable in the luxurious massage chair, the man tossed a grape into his mouth and casually announced that nobody would be dying that day. The problem was something else entirely. The mission's progress was terrible. Having spent only $10,000 in 5 days, the boy was nowhere near reaching the week's target. Shock spread across the young man's face as he realized the enemy had complete control over his financial information. In a lazy voice, the villain explained that both he and the God of Darkness monitored every single cent and had already grown tired of the boy's sluggish pace. That was the final trigger. Haunted by the trauma of the previous nights and exhausted from being kept in the dark, Siley raised his voice and demanded the truth about this deity and the reason behind those sickening rules. Displaying Displaying his usual twisted grin, the assassin mocked him and asked whether he had come up with any theories of his own. Looking down, the boy admitted that the only thing he knew for certain was that failure meant execution. Pressed for an answer, he guessed that the entity and the card were actually created by the same being. The response drew a genuine burst of laughter from the executioner, who openly mocked his captive's imagination. That arrogant reaction was the final straw. Siley completely lost his temper. Boiling with rage, he exploded into a barrage of shouting, demanding to know why he had been sentenced to death in the first place, and begging for an explanation of what exactly counted as a forbidden expense. The flood of questions did nothing to disturb the dark messenger's calm. With all the laziness in the world, he scratched the back of his neck and mocked the boy, saying he should already have his answers if he had paid attention to the details. But boredom soon gave way to sadism. A twisted smile stretched across the villain's face from ear to ear as he prepared his one and only answer to the interrogation. The blade of his weapon sliced through the air like a gunshot and stopped just millimeters from the young man's eyes. With an ice-cold stare, the executioner growled his final warning. Servants had no right to question anything. Terror swallowed the boy whole. He froze in place, drenched in cold sweat, and unable to even breathe properly. Satisfied by the fear he had created, the man lowered his staff and let out a sigh. Since his target had shown the unprecedented audacity to challenge him, he decided to throw him a tiny scrap of information. Spinning the staff in his hand, he revealed the first two directives of the game. Every cent received had to be spent without exception. However, just as he opened his mouth to reveal the third rule, something invisible caught his attention. He floated upward and abruptly cut the conversation short. Desperate for the missing information, the boy demanded that the explanation continue. The messenger simply shrugged, saying the secret would only be revealed if his prey managed to stay alive until the end of the week. Wearing a sinister smile, he promised that an incoming disaster would make the boy forget all about the rules. Assuring him that the real fun was about to begin, the shadowy figure vanished into thin air. The young man panicked, begging the creature to explain the warning and stop leaving him in the dark. Too late. Before the shadow disappeared completely, the room's door was violently thrown open. The sound of heavy, aggressive footsteps flooded the room, announcing that the promised trouble had just crossed the threshold. 4 burly men in suits stormed inside without asking permission. Before Siley could even react, 2 of the thugs pinned him down by force, slamming him against the chair and holding him in place. Right behind them came the true leader of the operation, a slender blonde woman dressed in dark clothing and oversized round glasses, radiating an intimidating presence. She removed the glasses, confirmed the target's name, and tossed a stack of photographs onto the table. Sitting down arrogantly on a leather couch, she crossed her arms and demanded answers. The moment Siley looked at the photos, a chill ran down his spine. The images showed the vehicle collision and the exact moment the crazed driver had charged at him with a knife. Instantly, the executioner's ominous warning about terrible trouble arriving echoed through his mind, reminding him of the death sentence hanging over his head. Trying to maintain his composure, the young man confronted the woman, demanding to know who she was and what her gang wanted in his room. The blonde flashed a mocking smile. She explained that her identity was classified information, but insisted that he answer her questions honestly. Holding up a photo of the missing driver, she got straight to the point. Where had the woman gone after the accident? Siley froze, desperately trying to figure out how much this dangerous stranger actually knew. The memory of the girl's death caused him to hesitate, and the nervousness was written all over his face. The blonde immediately caught the change in his expression and became certain he was hiding something. Faced with his tense silence, she lost patience, slammed her hand against the table, and demanded the truth, reminding him that his face was clearly visible in the accident photos. At that moment, Siley figured something out. The woman knew nothing about the Reaper or the Black Card. Sensing a chance to escape, he immediately began putting on an act. He claimed that he had nearly died in the accident and that the driver owed him a huge amount of money. With heavy sarcasm, he asked whether the blonde and her 4 bodyguards really wanted to involve themselves in someone else's financial mess. The question caught the intruder off guard because it wasn't what she had been expecting. Realizing his bluff was actually working, Siley doubled down, painting the victim as a chronic deadbeat and advising the blonde to walk away before she got dragged into trouble herself. The woman stared at him thoughtfully, sensing that something wasn't adding up. With a cynical smile, she crossed her arms and remarked that people like him were experts at pretending to be tougher than they really were. In that instant, all of Siley's confidence crumbled. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together in Siley's mind. The hidden deity, the executioner, and the Black Card were all parts of the same dangerous machine. Determined to protect that life or death secret, he tried to keep up the act and continue playing dumb. The blonde noticed his resistance and let out a dismissive sigh. She knew he wouldn't talk willingly, but she assured him that her organization had very effective ways of extracting the truth. She mentioned the name of one of her associates and asked whether that man had confiscated the boy's belongings. Firm footsteps echoed through the hallway moments later. Another member of the group entered the room carrying the very black card that had been taken from Siley, accompanied by a spa employee holding the boy's clothes. The leader immediately ordered her subordinate to conduct a full investigation into the prisoner's history before turning around to leave, confident that the mystery would be solved within minutes. The moment Siley saw the crucial object in the enemy's hands, his desperation reached its limit. Losing the card meant certain doom. With the Reaper's death threat echoing through his mind, the crushing pressure finally shattered his self-control. He lunged forward in desperation, screaming for them to give back his property, and grabbed the woman's arm. The response was immediate. She ordered his execution on the spot. The bodyguards pounced on him with brutal force, completely ignoring his desperate pleas. In the middle of the physical struggle, the knot holding the towel around Siley's waist suddenly gave way. The fabric dropped straight to the floor, leaving the boy completely exposed. The room fell into an awkward silence, and the blonde instantly froze, staring at the scene in total shock. Red with embarrassment, Siley hurriedly grabbed the towel and wrapped himself back up, stammering that it had all been a terrible accident. Breaking the tension with a touch of sarcasm, the woman signaled for her guards to back off and told him to get dressed already. Still trying to salvage what remained of his dignity, the young man moved toward her to thank her for the temporary mercy, completely unaware that his foot was about to catch the edge of the towel. The fall was unavoidable. Siley tangled his foot in the fabric, lost his balance, and crashed directly toward the blonde. Reacting instinctively, the woman delivered a perfectly timed strike that sent him flying right back onto the floor. All he could do was curl up and protect himself from further damage. Convinced that the whole thing had been some cheap stunt, the leader immediately demanded that the police be called. The nearest bodyguard quickly stepped in to calm her down, warning that involving the authorities would ruin the group's plans and create unnecessary trouble with her father. Convinced by the argument, she changed her mind and instead ordered a full withdrawal, taking all of the young man's belongings with them. Panic instantly consumed Siley. He desperately begged them not to take his possessions, knowing that losing the black card would amount to a death sentence. Before leaving through the door, one of the men tossed a thick stack of cash at his feet, sarcastically claiming it would compensate him for everything that had been confiscated. Despite being completely outmatched, Siley tried to chase after the group while the spa employee attempted to help him, but the intruders vanished down the hallway before he could catch up. Curious about the entire incident, the attendant casually commented on the temperament of the young lady from the Gu family. Pressing for answers, Siley learned that the blonde was the heiress of one of the most influential and dangerous clans in the region. Without his original clothes, and with time working against him, Siley had no choice but to make do with what he had. He threw on a ridiculous pair of duck-patterned pajamas and slipped into the hotel's disposable slippers. With his life hanging by a thread and no time to worry about looking ridiculous, he marched through the city streets with a single goal: find his rival's territory and reclaim what belonged to him. Eventually, Siley arrived in front of a massive estate. A flawless red carpet stretched toward the entrance, while 10 guards stood watch at the main gate. Impressed by the sheer level of wealth and prestige surrounding the family, the young man attempted to strike up a conversation with one of the guards. The giant didn't even blink, standing there like a stone statue. Assuming the man hadn't heard him, Siley waved a hand in front of his face in an effort to get a response, only to be completely ignored. The silence was suddenly shattered by the bizarre and thunderous roar of an engine, causing everyone to turn toward the street. The head of security immediately barked an order at the top of his lungs, startling the pajama-clad boy. A gigantic red Jeep stormed through the entrance, completely destroying the elegant atmosphere of the estate and leaving the guards speechless at the driver's lack of manners. The moment the door opened, all 10 sentries bowed in perfect unison to greet the newcomer. Stepping out of the vehicle was Miss Sun, carrying herself with overwhelming confidence. Her short red hair, red leather jacket, and tight black pants gave her an imposing presence. A servant hurried over and politely informed her that the master of the house was already waiting inside. The redhead rolled her eyes and clicked her tongue in annoyance. Meetings and business discussions were clearly the last thing on her mind. As far as she was concerned, the the purpose of this visit was something far more important. Pressing a button on her key fob, she popped open the Jeep's trunk with a mechanical groan. Inside sat a gigantic arrangement of flowers, complete with a massive marriage proposal display attached to it. Completely satisfied with her surprise, the young woman flashed a confident smile and demanded to see the heir immediately, leaving both Siley and the estate guards frozen in disbelief at her sheer audacity. The redhead let out a mocking laugh and ordered the security staff to call their boss immediately because she had an important matter to settle. Standing beside the guards, Siley watched the walking volcano in confusion, unable to figure out who this intimidating woman really was. As if his situation wasn't bad enough, one of the newcomer's pet birds mistook his completely bald head for a perch and landed right on top of it, nearly giving him a heart attack. The movement immediately caught the Jeep driver's attention. Before she could react, however, one of the guards stepped forward and informed her that the heiress was not currently at the estate. The news caught both of them off guard. Frustrated, the redhead and Siley immediately started firing questions one after another, leaving the employee completely overwhelmed. The woman in red quickly redirected her frustration towards Siley. She demanded to know who he was and why he was looking for the blonde. The young man, however, barely heard a word. His mind was completely consumed by panic over the stolen black card and the total lack of support from the shadowy Reaper. Ignoring her turned out to be the worst mistake he could have made. Her patience vanished instantly. Moving with frightening speed, the redhead's right fist slammed directly into Siley's jaw and sent him crashing to the ground. Thrown into the dirt, he found himself cornered by the aggressive woman, who demanded immediate answers about what he wanted with her girlfriend. Wiping his face, Siley could only wonder how everything had spiraled so completely out of control. After constantly ending up on the losing side, Siley finally snapped. He confronted the redhead head-on, calling her insane and completely unreasonable. Then he vented his frustration by revealing the real reason behind his search. The heiress of that mansion had stolen his most valuable belongings. Miss Sun froze and blinked in disbelief. Shocked, she asked whether her friend had really become a thief. Siley confirmed it with fire in his eyes, revealing that the blonde was working alongside a man named Wayne. The redhead was surprised by the pair's audacity, but after connecting a few dots, an intrigued smile spread across her face. Without wasting another second, she marched back toward her Jeep, already knowing exactly where the two of them were likely hiding. One of the guards hurried after her, reminding her that the family patriarch was still waiting inside. She didn't even bother turning around. Completely uninterested in business matters, she told the guard to give the old man her regards and let him know she had something far more urgent to handle. The moment she reached for the vehicle's door handle, Siley intercepted her and grabbed her wrist. Already irritated by his behavior, the redhead demanded to know what he wanted now. With a calculated smile, the young man asked to join the hunt and help recover his stolen property. She stared at him in complete disbelief. The last thing she wanted was to drag around a walking disaster dressed in duck-patterned pajamas. The rejection left Siley cornered, desperately searching for an argument strong enough to convince her. Then he spotted the perfect opportunity. Wearing a strategic smile, he dropped a massive lie. He claimed that he was the blonde heiress's ex-boyfriend. The revelation caught Miss Sun completely off guard. The bizarre claim instantly captured her interest. Without a second thought, she ordered him into the Jeep. The vehicle's engine roared to life as she made a violent turn and sped away from the estate in the opposite direction. High above them, a dark silhouette watched the vehicle disappear into the distance. The executioner stood silently, wearing his usual sadistic smile. With an icy stare, the Reaper simply waited for the perfect moment to strike and claim the boy's life. Meanwhile, at the top of one of the most modern skyscrapers in the city, the atmosphere was tense. Wayne was presenting an investigation report to the blonde heiress, but the results were disappointing. According to everything they had uncovered, Siley appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary nobody with no real significance. The conclusion immediately ignited the young woman's temper. Refusing to accept it, she demanded an even deeper investigation, convinced that her subordinate had overlooked something important. Wayne tried to defend himself, insisting that the target was far too ordinary to be hiding any major secrets. The blonde, however, grabbed her head in frustration. Her obsession had a reason. For a long time, she had been hunting for clues related to the mysterious Shadow faction, collecting nothing but failures. She believed she had finally uncovered a breakthrough when she tracked down the driver from the previous accident, only for the woman to disappear without a trace. The only person left behind had been the college student. That was when Wayne played his strongest card. He pulled out the confiscated black card and placed it on the table. Pointing at the artifact, he explained that this was the real mystery. The card carried Siley's name and an elite-level account number, something completely incompatible with the life of an ordinary young man. The leader's eyes lit up immediately. When she checked the balance and saw the absurd fortune that had already passed through the account, she was left in absolute shock by the power hidden within the artifact. Wayne studied the boy's financial records and couldn't make sense of the account. For an ordinary college student, moving hundreds of thousands of dollars was completely abnormal. The blonde, however, cut him off without the slightest bit of patience. That $40,000 balance was a joke compared to what truly interested her, the secret organization capable of burning through millions of dollars in just a matter of hours. The revelation of such absurd amounts left her ally speechless. Frustrated by yet another lead that seemed to go nowhere, the heiress collapsed onto the couch and swallowed the bitterness of another failure. Once again, she had fallen short of reaching the shadowy elite she had been chasing. Seeing how obsessed his boss had become, Wayne offered a serious warning. Pursuing people of that caliber was a one-way road and an incredibly dangerous one. She simply thanked him for the concern, fully aware of the risks involved. The tense atmosphere was broken when Wayne glanced at the clock and nearly jumped out of his seat. He had completely forgotten about an important appointment with Sun Meow Meow, the explosive redhead everyone preferred to avoid. Reluctant as he was, he needed to face the meeting if he wanted any chance of proving his worth to his father. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to a gas station, where the red Jeep had pulled in with Silai and his new ally waiting nearby. Sun Meow Meow's phone suddenly rang, breaking the silence around the convenience store. The moment she saw Weon's name on the screen, a bright smile spread across her face. Without thinking twice, she answered on speakerphone, allowing Silai to hear every word. The redhead immediately started demanding an explanation for why the blonde had skipped their scheduled meeting. On the other end of the line, Weon tried to make amends, explaining that her day had been complete chaos and suggesting a formal dinner as compensation. Sun Meow Meow considered the idea painfully boring. Instead, she fired back with a far more aggressive proposal. They would settle everything in a nighttime street race on a deserted road. The conditions were simple. If the blonde crossed the finish line first, they would discuss their pending business matters. If she lost, Weon would have to endure a humiliating punishment invented by the redhead. To make things even more interesting, Sun Meow Meow casually announced that she was currently accompanied by her rival's boyfriend. Silai nearly wanted to disappear into the ground from embarrassment, horrified by the outrageous claim. The revelation completely confused both Weon and Wayne, who tried to figure out what kind of bald-headed man could possibly be riding around with the redhead. Once the pieces clicked into place, and they realized it was the same young man they had robbed at the spa, disbelief filled the office. The heiress completely lost her composure. She shouted her rival's name so loudly that Sun Meow Meow had to pull the phone away from her ear. Foaming with rage, the blonde accepted the race and promised to ruin their little celebration. Realizing this was his only chance to survive, Silai took action. He snatched the phone from the redhead's hand and shouted directly at his enemy. Even after being insulted and mocked as a crazy bald man, his determination never wavered. He needed that black card back at any cost. Taking control of the conversation, Silai openly challenged the blonde and demanded that she show up immediately. As his trump card, he mentioned the secret involving the Porsche driver, leaving Weon with no easy way out. His proposal was straightforward. If she wanted the truth, she would have to beat them on the road. On the other end, the heiress realized the boy knew far more than he should. Swallowing her suspicions, she accepted the challenge. After ending the call, fully aware of how dangerous the situation might become, she changed into suitable clothes and ordered Wayne to accompany her immediately. Back inside the Jeep, Sun Meow Meow had already started creating an entire dramatic soap opera in her head. In her imagination, Silai had once been a quiet and loyal boyfriend who won the heiress's heart, only to throw everything away after being caught with another woman on a balcony. In the redhead's wildly distorted version of events, the betrayal ended with a brutal beating, a dramatic breakup, and plenty of tears and screaming. Silai considered the theory completely ridiculous. The only thing that mattered to him was recovering the black card and saving his own life. The driver continued teasing him, labeling him a shameless cheater, and demanding more gossip about the mysterious balcony woman. Silai chose to remain silent, convinced that the redhead's brain operated in a completely different reality. The real nightmare, however, revealed itself a second later. When he looked ahead, a wave of terror shot through his body. Sun Meow Meow had become so distracted laughing, talking, and gesturing that she had completely let go of the steering wheel. The Jeep surged forward at terrifying speed, racing wildly down the road without control. A scream of pure panic escaped Silai as he stared at the disaster rapidly approaching. Meow Meow paid absolutely no attention to her passenger's panic. She simply grabbed the steering wheel again and burst into another fit of laughter, completely ignoring his warnings about the dangers of the winding mountain road hanging over a sheer drop. The dangerous mountain route served as the stage for the street race. At the foot of the mountain, an energetic crowd and dozens of heavily modified cars had gathered for the illegal event. The redhead threw her Jeep into the main area with a violent brake slam, bringing it to an aggressive stop near the spectators. Overflowing with adrenaline, she jumped out of the vehicle and ordered Siley to do the same. The young man climbed out looking completely wrecked and nauseated after surviving her suicidal driving. Without a shred of sympathy, the girl mocked his condition and wandered off to mingle with a group of women, leaving him stranded in the middle of the chaos. After catching his breath, the protagonist began studying the area. The pavement was flawless, and the starting grid was packed with powerful machines and highly skilled professional racers. That was when he overheard two spectators talking about the redhead. According to them, she was a complete maniac behind the wheel, but absolutely unbeatable on the track. The information made Siley's stomach turn even more. If that lunatic won, any chance he had of negotiating the return of his black card would disappear. The atmosphere changed when the deep roar of a high-performance engine echoed through the valley. A gleaming yellow Alfa Romeo sliced through the crowd and pulled in with unmistakable confidence. The moment Sun Meow Meow spotted the car, her eyes lit up with excitement, and she sprinted toward it like a woman possessed. Stepping out of the sports car were the blonde heiress and her right-hand man, both radiating arrogance as they marched toward the inevitable confrontation. The blonde's threatening gaze met Siley's, confirming that the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. The young man tried to step forward and demand his card back, but the redhead completely hijacked the moment. Charging in like a hurricane, she immediately unleashed a barrage of taunts aimed at rattling her rival. Weon and her companion watched the outburst with open contempt. Annoyed by the invasion of her personal space, the blonde threw a strike to keep the redhead away. Meow Meow blocked the move with a laugh and grabbed onto her rival purely to annoy her. The owner of the Alfa Romeo bluntly reminded her that their arrangement was strictly professional and demanded an end to all that unnecessary intimacy once the race was over. Unfazed, Sun Meow Meow leaned close to her rival's ear and whispered a sinister warning, asking whether she was truly prepared to pay the price of defeat. The provocation immediately got under the blonde's skin. She confidently promised a crushing victory. The redhead scoffed and warned that if her rival failed, she would personally take control of everything herself. Refusing to let anyone interfere with her family issues, the driver of the yellow sports car demanded that the race begin immediately. Watching the clash of egos unfold, Siley finally understood the truth behind the thief's arrogance. Beneath all that pride and confidence hid a deep wound tied to her family. Unfortunately, he didn't have time to play therapist. Recovering the black card remained his top priority if he wanted to avoid execution. Before he could interfere, the redhead climbed back into her massive Jeep. The vehicle was far from ideal for a high-performance race, but she looked fully prepared to turn the competition into complete chaos. While the rivals continued arguing, Siley quietly slipped over to the yellow Alfa Romeo. At the same time, the redhead brushed aside her opponent's warnings, insisting she was completely focused on the race. Weon answered with equal arrogance, making it clear that the asphalt would deliver the final verdict. When the blonde returned to the driver's seat, she caught the intruder shamelessly searching through the interior of her vehicle. Furious at the sight of the man who had pretended to be her boyfriend only hours earlier rummaging through her belongings, she delivered a vicious kick that knocked him straight into the cabin. Before Siley could react, the heiress slammed the door shut and locked both of them inside. The young man immediately panicked and demanded to be let out. The blonde, however, imposed a ruthless condition. Since he had already played the role of her boyfriend in front of the redhead, he was going to see it through to the end. He would serve as her co-driver and hold her briefcase during the race. Siley threatened to call the police. The driver simply laughed. She challenged him to make the call and see whether the authorities would believe a man wearing duck print pajamas or a wealthy and influential heiress. At that moment, Sun Meow Meow appeared beside the sports car's window. With pure sarcasm, the redhead teased her rival, asking whether she had brought her partner along as a lucky charm for the race. Weon didn't understand the joke at first. Then the other woman sarcastically pointed out how quickly she seemed to have forgiven her supposed boyfriend's betrayal. The comment instantly made the situation even more awkward. The blonde immediately connected the dots. Furious about the bluff, she lunged at Siley inside the cabin and demanded to know what kind of nonsense he had told that psychopath. Cornered, The young man admitted that he had made up the entire story just to save his own skin. Having no patience for explanations, Weon cut him off and ordered the redhead to line up at the starting point before she got disqualified for failing to show up. Silei still tried to open the door and make a run for it, but he was met with a sharp order to buckle up and keep his mouth shut. Laughing at the irritation of both rivals, Sun Meow Meow tossed out another catty remark and confidently marched back to her jeep, her ego inflated and her victory already guaranteed in her mind. The news that Gudon's two greatest female drivers were about to face off set the crowd on fire. Spectators packed themselves along the edge of the road so they wouldn't miss a single second of the race. The girl in charge of the start positioned herself between the two vehicles and gave the final signal. The moment the flag dropped, engines roared to life and both machines launched like rockets, devouring the road and leaving the crowd's cheers behind. Behind the wheel of the yellow beast, the blonde gripped the steering wheel with absolute focus. Panic made Silei break into a cold sweat in the passenger seat when he noticed that the redhead showed no mercy, charging right behind them with murderous determination. The two cars tore through the mountain course at a ridiculous pace, attacking even the tightest corners without either driver lifting off the throttle. Determined to keep the lead, the owner of the Alfa Romeo buried her foot into the accelerator. The car hugged the pavement as she expertly controlled every drift through the corners. Silei had to admit to himself that the girl was an absolute monster behind the wheel. As impressed as he was, he couldn't hide his anxiety. He stared through the windshield, secretly hoping the redhead's jeep would manage to overtake them. Noticing that he was rooting against her, the blonde redirected her anger toward her captive. She fired off a barrage of insults, accusing him of wanting her rival to win simply so he could solve his own problems. The young man swore she had it all wrong, but the driver ignored every word and promised to show him what she was really capable of. The speedometer needle kept climbing, scraping past 250 miles per hour while the engine screamed at its limits. Crushed against the seat by the brutal force of acceleration, Silei became convinced he was trapped inside a car with a complete psychopath. Driving that fast on such a twisting mountain road was pure insanity. The blonde, however, displayed flawless technique and absolutely no fear of danger as she pushed the accelerator even harder. Silei was on the verge of having a heart attack. The car shook so violently that he bounced around like a rag doll, his head repeatedly smacking the roof. Just when he felt death knocking on the door, his hand slipped and, touch. The blonde instantly froze. Pure fury spread across her face. Sorry, he stammered. The red jeep pulled alongside them. Sun Meow Meow shouted through the window. Look at the lovebirds getting cozy. With a flawless maneuver, she blew past the Alfa Romeo and flashed her headlights. A mocking goodbye. The blonde exploded with rage. She slammed the accelerator. The yellow sports car roared as its tires tore into the asphalt in pursuit of the jeep, but Meow Meow remained ahead, openly mocking her rival. Then the dead man's curve appeared. The blonde yanked the wheel aggressively. The Alfa Romeo immediately started sliding sideways, its rear end scraping against the guardrail. Sparks exploded everywhere. Metal screamed. Terrified, Silei grabbed his seatbelt and shouted, "What are you doing?" The answer was short and sharp. Shut up. They were riding the very edge of the cliff. More sparks, more grinding metal. The right side bumper was completely destroyed. The blonde held the wheel with superhuman determination, fighting against fate itself through what felt like a miracle of driving skill. The Alfa Romeo escaped the abyss and returned to the road. A violent impact threw Weon's car back onto the main route, leaving her at a huge disadvantage against Master Sha. The near-death experience rattled her, but she swallowed her fear and locked her eyes back onto the road. Inside the vehicle, panic had reached its peak. Silei clung to his seat with his eyes shut tight, convinced that the end was near. Making matters worse, Sun Meow Meow kept yelling over the radio, urging the driver to abandon the race before somebody got killed. Tired of hearing it, Weon tried to tune out the voices. The boy also begged her to give up, terrified that he wouldn't make it out alive. The blonde's response was explosive. She blamed him for the entire mess. Trying not to make things worse, the young man attempted to calm her down. He suggested that giving up wouldn't be the end of the world and that there would be other opportunities in the future. Her reaction only became more intense. Gripping the steering wheel in fury, she stomped on the gas pedal. The engine howled. Silei could do nothing except cover his head and prepare for the worst. Winning wasn't about pride. It was about survival. She needed the prize money to pull her family out of danger and solve the problems threatening her father. The adrenaline flooding her system was so overwhelming that she completely ignored the warning signs of mechanical failure, spreading through the vehicle, something the passenger noticed immediately. The final stretch contained the most dangerous turn on the entire mountain. Siley completely lost it, warning that they were about to be launched straight into the abyss. Unable to understand her stubbornness, he demanded to know why she wouldn't simply accept her rival's terms instead of getting both of them killed. The girl's stance was unwavering. She made it crystal clear that she would rather face a tragic end than suffer defeat. Siley called her crazy, arguing that dying meant losing everything. Even so, with frightening conviction, she insisted that some missions were bigger than life itself and worth any risk. Changing his approach in an instant, the young man grabbed the driver's hand and revealed a bold strategy. He promised that they could win the race without anyone dying, even though the plan sounded completely insane. The girl's reaction was immediate and violent. Outraged by the absurdity of the idea, she unleashed a flurry of punches on her ally, leaving the boy begging for mercy with a thoroughly battered face. Even bruised and aching, he continued insisting that she focus on the road and trust his tactic to catch their opponents completely off guard. Meanwhile, in the vehicle ahead, the rival team was already celebrating with laughter, convinced that victory was theirs. Knowing this was their final card to play, Weon pushed the yellow Alfa Romeo to its absolute limit and closed the gap. Determined to risk everything, the young woman activated the control that opened the convertible roof while they were still flying down the road at high speed, leaving her passenger completely stunned. Without wasting a second, the boy told her to move so they could switch positions while the car was still in motion. He took over the steering wheel while she prepared for the next step. At that critical moment, a loud commotion erupted as they deliberately tried to get the attention of the car ahead. Distracted and irritated by the unexpected shouting coming from her rivals, the lead driver turned her head to see what was happening. She walked right into the trap. The completely unexpected distraction coming from the yellow Alfa Romeo shattered her concentration. Taking her eyes off the road for even a moment proved to be a fatal mistake. Without noticing the danger ahead, her vehicle hit a speed bump. The brakes immediately failed, the front end was heavily damaged, and flames began to spread as the car was overtaken. Seeing victory within reach, Weon exploded with excitement and wrapped her partner in a tight hug, even while he was still trying to keep the car under control. The sudden contact left the young man completely red-faced and flustered, having never been that close to a girl before. The moment she realized how carried away she had gotten, both of them quickly pulled apart. Since the boy's driving skills were fairly limited, he immediately begged the blonde to take control again. A short time later, the yellow Alfa Romeo crossed the finish line to the deafening cheers of the crowd, leaving their rival's supporters in complete shock. After stepping out of the car, the young woman thanked the audience with a friendly smile. Meanwhile, Siley could barely walk. His entire body ached, and his lower back felt completely wrecked, but he still smiled in relief knowing he had survived the madness. In the middle of the celebration, Sun Meow Meow came running over to congratulate the driver. With her usual sarcasm, she joked that no normal girl would ever resort to a stunt like that in front of her boyfriend. The rival was forced to swallow her pride, but Weon had no interest in small talk. Displaying complete control of the situation, the blonde declared that since she had won the race, every clause of their agreement would now be written on her terms. With a faint smile, she quietly admitted that she had used a distraction tactic during the race to throw her opponent off balance, but in the end, only the final result mattered. With no alternatives left, the defeated driver accepted the conditions. Sun Meow Meow wasted no time and immediately dragged everyone away to finalize the pending paperwork. Even while complaining about the winner's attitude, the other side acknowledged the loss. From a distance, Siley watched everything unfold. He knew perfectly well that now that the blonde had won, questions about the mysterious girl from the balcony would inevitably come next. As the discussion between the women grew heated over the details of the agreement, Weon finally lost patience. She cut off the argument and called for Wayne to audit the signatures and review the reports. Seeing the perfect opportunity, while everyone else was focused on the paperwork, Siley quietly gathered the documents and attempted to slip away toward the office. He wanted to avoid any questioning about the Porsche owner at all costs. The escape attempt failed almost immediately. Weon noticed the movement and ordered him to stop. Without giving him any chance to explain himself, she pointed firmly toward the car and ordered him to get inside and wait. Embarrassed and tense, the young man tried to play it cool, feeling sweat run down his face as he watched his chances of recovering the coveted black card slip farther away once again. The sky was already beginning to glow with shades of pink as dawn approached when the yellow Alfa Romeo cut through the busy streets of the city. With Weon fully focused on driving, the young man remained silent in the passenger seat, unable to gather the courage to ask to be let out of the vehicle. Weon's phone rang, and the atmosphere changed instantly. With a threatening glare, she ordered Silay to stay completely silent, warning him that a merciless witch would destroy anyone who crossed her path. But the aggressive attitude vanished in an instant when she answered the call from her father, switching to a gentle and affectionate tone. On the other end of the line, the man explained that son Meow Meow had already signed all the paperwork and completed the payment. Curious, he asked how his daughter had managed to resolve everything so quickly, but the young woman brushed off the question, claiming that women have their own secrets. She ended the conversation by casually mentioning that she was with Silay. Sitting beside her, the passenger watched in complete disbelief, unable to process the bizarre transformation of a girl who acted like a ruthless predator one moment and spoke like an angel to her family the next. The moment she noticed him staring, she launched into another verbal attack. The young man tried thanking her for the ride into the city and asked to be dropped off, saying he could make his way home on his own. The driver ignored the request and headed straight for a restaurant. He attempted to claim that he was in a hurry, which only irritated the blonde even more. Quickly changing tactics, he suggested that she save her money and that he could simply have dinner with his dorm mates instead. The excuse only made her angrier. She fired back that this wasn't some casual invitation, especially since he still had a promise to keep. To end the discussion, she pulled the coveted black card from her pocket and waved it right in front of his face. The rest of the ride passed in complete silence. Offended, she couldn't stop dwelling on the fact that she was being rejected right when she was trying to be generous. They arrived at one of the most upscale establishments in the region. Weon ordered the staff to bring out the most expensive dishes on the menu, along with a premium sparkling wine. Escorted into a private dining area, Silay found himself staring at an elite feast and the iconic pink bottle, waiting for the interrogation to begin. The sight of the luxurious spread left the young man frozen in place. He remained standing until his host directly ordered him to sit down. Completely unenthusiastic, Silay sank into his chair, staring at the floor while clutching the folder against his chest like a shield. Noticing his discomfort, Weon smiled and suggested that he relax. She assured him that the black card would be returned as soon as they finished eating. The promise did nothing to improve his mood. He remained visibly tense. Trying to break the ice, the blonde raised her glass of sparkling wine and proposed a toast to their victory that night. After taking a satisfied sip, she complimented the drink, displaying a calmness that was beginning to wear away at her passenger's patience. Pressed for time, he slammed his glass onto the table hard enough to make it shake. She simply ignored the provocation. As she enjoyed a bite of steak, the driver thanked him for his support and admitted that using bold tactics against rivals like Meow Meow had been worth it. What truly mattered was that her father would finally recognize her value instead of viewing her as someone weak. Between bites, she commented that she found him interesting and that if he really had no connection to the mysterious Porsche owner, the two of them could actually become good friends. Silay ignored the conversation entirely, staring off into space. Growing tired of his indifference, Weon asked why he was being so quiet and why he hadn't touched his food, assuming he was still holding a grudge over their previous conflicts. That was the final straw. Completely losing control, the young man shot to his feet, slammed both hands on the table, and declared that he had no time for celebratory dinners or fake friendships. Furious, he crossed every line of courtesy and shouted for her to hand over the black card once and for all. His audacity left Weon genuinely stunned. No man had ever spoken to her that way before. Recovering her composure, the blonde replied coldly. If he was so desperate to leave on an empty stomach, then he would have to come clean about the Porsche owner right then and there before he could claim his prize. Rage surged through Silay. The veins in his face bulged as his eyes burned with anger. Unfazed by the intimidation, the girl simply reminded him that he had personally promised to provide answers. Cornered with nowhere left to run, the young man met her gaze and, through clenched teeth, insisted that the entire situation had been a complete accident and that he had absolutely no idea who the woman was. Then, in one final gesture, he extended his hand and demanded the item. His hostile tone caused Weon's confidence to falter. Looking genuinely hurt, she admitted defeat and remarked bitterly that her mistake had been trying to build a connection with someone like him. The blonde pulled the black card from her pocket, but the young man's relief lasted only a moment. With a cynical smile, she called over a waiter and handed him the card. Following her orders, the employee carried the card to the payment terminal and executed a full account lock. A sharp beep echoed from the system as the balance instantly dropped to zero. Silay's world collapsed in seconds, and his face twisted into pure despair. Without looking back, The young woman headed for the exit, sarcastically wishing that he would enjoy the feast he had rejected so enthusiastically. Left alone in front of the lavish and outrageously expensive table, the boy stared at the champagne and finally grasped the scale of the disaster. With no funds and an astronomical bill waiting to be paid, he was completely ruined. Even staring into the abyss, the young man refused to give up. Looking at the overflowing table, he convinced himself that such an absurd situation had to be some kind of nightmare. Determined not to leave this world on an empty stomach, he decided to follow the blonde's ironic advice. Wiping away his tears, he began devouring everything in sight, figuring that if he was going out, it might as well be from overeating. In the middle of the feast, a familiar and imposing presence appeared on the sofa across from him. Tossing his feet onto the table without the slightest concern, the newcomer mocked the scene, comparing the young man to a hamster with its cheeks stuffed full of food. With watery eyes, Sile kept chewing on a chicken leg and tried to fire back, but his mouth was too full for any words to come out. With a cold chuckle, the visitor remarked that someone of his stature had no reason to hide from anyone. He explained that the black card system allowed him to monitor subordinates during moments of desperation, but made it clear that he had no intention of wasting breath on someone who already had one foot in the grave. That statement sparked a flicker of hope. Surprised, Sile swallowed hard and asked if there was still a way out. Offering a sarcastic round of applause, the man congratulated him on his incredible luck and revealed that the first major mission had been completed with absolute success. Raising his glass in a toast, the mysterious figure asked whether he was satisfied with the outcome. Unable to understand how the bill had supposedly been paid when the balance had been reduced to zero, Sile watched the waiter calmly walk away. The visitor merely smiled and encouraged the young man to figure out the mystery for himself while preparing him for what came next. The man's calm tone hid a deep irritation with the boy's habit of questioning everything. Without warning, a dense crimson mist materialized throughout the room. The air became suffocating as unbearable agony wrapped itself around the young man. Unable to understand why he was being punished after successfully completing the challenge, Sile writhed in pain while the executioner simply smiled, coldly admitting that he enjoyed watching that kind of suffering. Sweat poured down the boy's face as he gritted his teeth through the torture. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Opening his eyes and looking down at his hands, he froze in shock. His fingernails were gone. Outraged, he demanded an explanation for the bizarre mutilation. Sipping his drink, the creature casually explained that while the removal did not damage any vital nerves, the human brain still processed the pain in its entirety. Then came the deadly warning. If the black card was ever lost again, the penalties would be permanent and would involve much more important parts of his body. Staring miserably at his injured hands, the young man was ordered to stop feeling sorry for himself. After all, he had chosen this fate with his own free will. Approaching with deliberate steps, the man announced that the trial phase was over. From that moment forward, the boy had advanced within the system and would now receive a fixed weekly payment of 880,000. The relief of surviving another week quickly gave way to confusion. Sile wanted to know how he had earned a promotion after spending every last cent of his previous budget. With an amused smile, the entity tapped him firmly on the head with his cane, mocking his lack of perspective and reminding him that his new rank operated under an entirely different spending scale. The huge amount of money deposited into his account brought Sile no peace whatsoever. The burden of having to burn through another 80,000 haunted him. He could already imagine the chaos that would follow if the fortune kept growing week after week. While spending money without restraint, a suspicion began to nag at him. The promotion seemed directly connected to something he had said earlier. Running out of patience, the young man cornered the dark figure with the cane and demanded to know the secret behind achieving a perfect result. The answer came in the form of a direct threat. The man made it clear that promotion or not, the boy still had no authority to question anything, but Sile refused to back down. He insisted that he only needed the answer so he could ensure that future missions were carried out flawlessly. Watching the entire exchange unfold, Esprit mocked the boy's overly serious attitude, since his results had far surpassed those of other subordinates. The god of the night finally decided to offer a lesson. According to the entity, true efficiency came from spending little and gaining much in return. Sile nearly broke his brain trying to understand how paying for a spa and a dinner fit into that philosophy. The moment he realized the young man was completely confused, Azire complained about wasting time on someone so naive. From that point on, the boy would have to figure out the logic behind the system on his own. No more hints, no more handouts, and certainly no more easy answers. Frustrated by the silence, the young man grumbled that he deserved a bonus for his success. The bold remark stopped his superior, who had already been heading for the exit. That sudden pause sparked a glimmer of hope in the boy. With complete disdain, the boss walked back to the table. He looked the young man straight in the eyes and told him the truth. The reward did exist, but he had no intention of handing it over simply because he didn't like him. Sile thought the man's attitude was a complete joke, wondering how pathetic someone had to be not to realize how ridiculous they looked. From the look on the boy's face, Azire picked up on the audacity and realized he was being silently judged. To break the tension, the superior got straight to the point and asked if he was really planning to leave empty-handed. Instantly, the young man's attitude changed completely, looking like an eager puppy waiting for a treat from its owner. With a snap of the entity's fingers, a board appeared in midair. Dozens of glowing cards floated in front of Sile. The instruction was simple: choose only two. Faced with that dazzling display, the young man froze, completely overwhelmed by the selection. There were 81 options in total, and Sile's mind tied itself in knots, thinking the entire black card system was a huge waste of time. Esser shut down the complaint immediately, telling him it wasn't his job to think about it, just pick already. The moment the boy touched the first card, it began spinning and flashing wildly. When he noticed it wasn't the top prize, the boss let out a mocking smile, but admitted the result was still good since that card guaranteed an absurd fortune within a single day. The boy's imagination took off instantly. He pictured himself piloting a luxurious flying machine and shining like an international celebrity, surrounded by camera flashes and crowds of hysterical fans. Sile was practically drooling over the fantasy. But the dream didn't last long. The superior smacked him across the face without mercy, ruining the daydream and ordering him to choose the second card without wasting time. Holding his cheek, the young man begged for a minute to think. Out of patience, the executioner told him to stop wasting his precious time. Sile pulled the next card, which repeated the same light show and aerial acrobatics. Anticipation filled the room as everyone waited to see the result. When the outcome was revealed, everyone was stunned. Even Estepre widened his eyes. Sile had just drawn the most valuable card of all, the golden investment finger. The problem was that the boy looked at the reward and thought it was garbage, which left the boss completely furious at such ingratitude. The value of that reward was beyond imagination. Almost nobody in history had ever drawn it, proving that the Dark Knight god himself had blessed his subordinate. Excited by the revelation, the young man wanted to know how to activate the power, but the superior let out a sarcastic laugh. He revealed that the item was reserved exclusively for the elite at the very top of the Dark Knight. Disappointed, Sile tried to negotiate for any other trinket instead, but was told it was impossible as the entity slowly began fading into the air. Before disappearing completely, the deity mocked him one last time, saying that he should focus on staying alive long enough to reach the level required to use the item. Sile found himself alone once again, staring at the banquet on the table and the emptiness left behind by his boss. Looking at the board, he realized the start of the week would be brutal. His main mission was simply not starving to death inside the most luxurious penthouse in the metropolis. Not long afterward, shouts of pure joy echoed throughout the place. In the middle of a hall packed with boxes, the young man celebrated securing his new address. Focused on the calculations in his notebook, he proudly wrote down that he had burned through 58,000 in just 3 days, more than 3 times the weekly spending limit. Exhausted but satisfied with his performance, Sile threw himself onto the soft couch and stretched out his legs. The rich lifestyle was proving to be worth it. A refreshed appearance, a high-end home, and plenty of money in his wallet. However, part of that success came from one specific reason. It was all thanks to Sun Meow Meow, whom he still considered completely crazy. The girl was so obsessed that she kept inviting her friends over to plan raids on his school, leaving them terrified by the idea. Sile couldn't figure out how she had discovered where he was staying. Luckily, his college schedule was pretty light, allowing him to stay hidden in his new safe house, far away from the watchful eyes of the feared Professor Sua. Now living on his own and answering to nobody, the path was wide open for far more interesting visitors. His new life felt like paradise. Staying up all night playing video games without worrying about the electric bill was the perfect setup. He was enjoying every bit of the freedom and luxury, but one question kept bothering him. He needed to figure out the the best way to use his reward. The prize was the result of a flawless mission. A few nights earlier, after plenty of persistence and the young man finally behaving himself, his superior had given in. Feeling generous, he decided to reveal the secret to succeeding in future missions. The entity used the dinner with Weon as an example, leaving the young man completely confused. The explanation hit him like a truck. While Siley had spent 40,000 during the date, the woman had bought him a bottle of wine worth 100,000. To the system, that was the ultimate example of smart spending. The young man's jaw nearly hit the floor. The idea that a single bottle could cost that much sounded insane. The boss explained that the real strategy was changing the dynamic with other people, creating situations where they would generate profit and financial support for him. That exact move was the reason the great god had approved the bonus. Intrigued, Siley paid attention to every word. The mystery surrounding the great god fascinated him, but the logic of using other people to multiply his spending still felt like a puzzle. The superior ended the explanation there, only adding that the young man should summon him the moment he wanted to activate the $1 million card. Lying on the couch, Siley burned through brain cells trying to process everything he had heard. The pieces were finally starting to come together. The people around him could become bridges to create far greater value. Even so, the true reason the god demanded such reckless spending remained a mystery. Letting out a yawn, Siley concluded that if he could uncover the deity's real plan, the world would be at his feet. The intense thinking made him hungry. Starving, he got up to look for something to eat, while reflecting on the madness of the wealthy elite. Spending 100,000 on a bottle of sparkling wine was completely detached from reality. As he walked toward the door, his mind was already working on the next step, creating a strategy to manipulate people into helping him burn through that mountain of money the right way. A flash of inspiration suddenly crossed Siley's mind, revealing a solution he had completely overlooked. He remembered Wei Shun Yue, the same person he had argued with not long ago. The young man slapped himself across the face, feeling deeply ashamed for forgetting someone who had helped him so much, despite their ridiculous disagreement. In the middle of those thoughts, suspicious noises echoed through the apartment hallway. When he turned around, he found himself face to face with the very girl who had been occupying his thoughts. The shock was mutual. The two froze, exchanging confused looks as if they could read each other's minds. Siley tried to process how she had ended up there and whether she was searching for answers about the secrets of the night. Awkwardly, he gave a small wave. She stopped, turned around, and bluntly demanded to know what he wanted after everything that had happened. Remaining calm, the young man decided to take a chance and invited her to dinner. Her surprise was obvious, but not long afterward, the two were already seated inside a luxury restaurant. At Bilu Dawn, the atmosphere was tense. Weon studied the young man carefully, convinced that he had some kind of issue with her, though she couldn't understand why, considering he had followed her there himself. Siley ignored the hostility, called over a server, and immediately started ordering one expensive item after another. While they waited for their food, Siley felt an enormous sense of relief as he realized their relationship had finally been repaired. The peaceful moment didn't last long. A man dressed in a scarlet suit appeared out of nowhere, completely ignoring Siley's existence while showering the young woman with compliments about her beauty. The intruder fired off a series of crude jokes at Siley's expense, treating him like a nobody, before turning to Weon with an audacious pickup line and inviting her to dinner so they could get to know each other better. Staying focused, Siley ignored the clown entirely and continued scrolling through his phone with complete indifference. The young man's lack of interest deeply irritated the stranger. Annoyed at being ignored, the man climbed onto the table to force both of them to acknowledge him. Introducing himself as Sansao, he flashed a self-satisfied smile and posed as though he were the most attractive and promising person in the world. Siley burst out laughing right in Sansao's face. Holding nothing back, he tore into the man, pointing out that as merely the third son of his family, he was practically irrelevant, and that his words carried no weight whatsoever. The remark left the intruder boiling with rage as he struggled to maintain his composure in front of Miss Wei. Furious, Sansao resorted to threats, but Siley didn't even blink. He remained completely calm, repeating that third sons were always useless and ordering him to get lost. While the young man stayed seated without a hint of concern, restaurant security was forced to step in and deal with the visitor's embarrassing outburst. The scene was pathetic. As the man shouted threats across the dining hall, his assistant desperately begged him to calm down, warning that damaging his relationship with Mr. Yule, the host of the event, would be a disastrous mistake. Faced with warnings about the consequences of his behavior, Sansao finally managed to regain control of himself. Putting on an air of fake superiority, he declared that he would let Siley off the hook this time and left with his subordinate. Silai followed their departure with an icy stare until he noticed Sansao intercepting a waitress carrying food toward their table. The bastard saw that the employee was serving table 11 and forcibly stopped her. He asked whether the food was meant for that bald guy, and, in a display of pure arrogance, attempted to bribe the waitress with a generous tip to redirect the dish elsewhere while putting on a ridiculous show of applause and empty compliments to attract attention. Leon watched the scene with amusement, finding it almost impressive how easily Silay managed to get under people's skin. However, her expression soon turned serious. She explained that the An family was a major force in the local catering industry and maintained influential connections with the restaurant's owner. Concerned, she urged him to be careful around someone as unstable as Sansao. At that moment, the waitress finally arrived at their table and served the order. Silay tried to reassure Weon, insisting there was nothing to worry about. The moment the dish was uncovered, however, the silence shattered as the young man let out a furious shout. Instead of a meal, there was a pile of garbage on the plate, made up of bizarre ingredients with an equally disturbing appearance. Wearing a cynical smile, the waitress informed them that it was a special gift personally sent by Sansao for the honored guests. Silay's anger instantly reached its breaking point. He exploded, unleashing all of his fury on the waitress after suffering such a deliberate humiliation. The waitress tried to justify herself, claiming that the customer at the neighboring table was an influential figure and that she was only trying to be polite. Silay wasn't buying the excuse. With a sarcastic smile, he ordered her to bring him the exact same dish, treating it like a challenge. Weon attempted to intervene, telling the employee to ignore the request, but Silay had already made up his mind. He mocked Sansao's so-called generosity and doubled down on the provocation while secretly plotting his revenge through the millionaire card. A short while later, the tension shifted elsewhere. Silay was confronting his mentor, Estre, furious because the system restricted the card's use precisely when he needed it most. Listening to music without a care in the world, Estre explained that it wasn't a bug but a limitation of the item itself. The power wasn't available whenever the user wanted. The mentor went on to explain that the card operated at full strength only between noon and midnight. Outside that time frame, its effectiveness would be drastically reduced and would last for a much shorter period. Now focused and cautious, Silay asked exactly what he could expect. Esther explained that the effect would be limited to a 2-hour window and confined to the boundaries of the hotel where the young man was staying. Silay didn't hesitate for a second and immediately accepted the conditions. Impressed by his student's determination, the mentor asked what his final move was going to be. The young man leaned closer and whispered every detail of his sinister plan into Esther's ear. The mentor listened carefully, clicked his tongue in satisfaction, and declared the plan approved. Outside, the atmosphere was growing heavier. Sansao's assistant questioned the cruelty of the gift sent to the table, but his boss merely laughed, brushing it off and treating the humiliation of his rival as something insignificant. The man with the glasses tried once more to emphasize the importance of maintaining a flawless image in front of Mr. Yule to secure a future independent of the family business, but Sansao simply shrugged, completely uninterested. The silence was broken by the grand arrival of a luxury Mercedes. Mr. Yule stepped out of the vehicle under Sansao's eager gaze. The young man immediately rushed forward to greet him, overflowing with carefully calculated friendliness. The host invited the group inside, but they had barely crossed the entrance when a deafening shout echoed through the building. Yule stopped in his tracks, visibly annoyed by the disturbance, and demanded an explanation. Sansao tried to downplay the situation, hoping to ignore the section where customers were complaining, but Yule was firm. To him, the customer was sacred. Without listening to another word, he marched straight toward the table where the commotion was coming from. There sat Silay, apologizing to his companion for the terrible experience at the restaurant. The moment Yule spotted him, his authoritative expression vanished, replaced by overwhelming excitement. He rushed toward Silay, calling him by name and pulling him into a warm embrace as though he had just reunited with one of the most important people in his life. Silay's aura was unmistakable, leaving Sansao standing behind them with his jaw hanging open. The shock was overwhelming as he watched the powerful Yule treat Silay with such affection and respect. Silay returned the gesture naturally, embracing the old acquaintance while shooting a victorious glance toward the intruder. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. The millionaire card's effect had struck its target with surgical precision. Silay had instructed Esprit to turn the influential Mr. Yule into his unwavering ally, laying the groundwork to destroy his rival's reputation and business. Completely influenced by the new connection, Mr. Yule guided the young man by the shoulder while demanding that the restaurant staff prepare the finest feast imaginable. As they passed the table, Silei casually mentioned the restaurant's terrible service. The moment Yul saw the pile of garbage that had been served as food, he nearly exploded. Rage and disbelief flooded his face as he wildly gestured toward the employees. The restaurant owner shouted in disgust, unable to believe such a thing had happened under his roof. The waitress stood frozen in place, paralyzed by fear, while Silei sarcastically pointed to Sansao's gift as proof of the restaurant's pathetic treatment of VIP guests. The tension became unbearable. Yul was boiling with anger, and Sansao watched from the sidelines, trembling as disaster approached. Yul wasted no time demanding an explanation from Sansao. Desperate, the rival tried to dodge responsibility, stammering that he hadn't known the two men were friends. The response hit him like a bucket of ice water. Yul made it clear that their friendship was irrelevant. Treating a customer so disgracefully, someone who should be regarded as nothing less than a deity, was completely unforgivable. With the authority of a man who ruled the industry, Yul crushed both Sansao's pride and his standing in the culinary world. When Sansao made a last-second attempt to save their business partnership, he was cut off without mercy. Yul immediately terminated any possibility of future cooperation and permanently banned him from the restaurant. Even as Sansao begged for forgiveness, and the waitress desperately tried to justify her actions to save her job, there was no turning back. The owner remained merciless. The employee was fired on the spot, and the rival was discarded like a worthless piece of trash, marking the humiliating collapse of his influence within the establishment. Sansao remained frozen in the middle of the restaurant, staring into space as the reality of his situation finally sank in. Everything had turned into a complete disaster. Not even the efforts of his assistant, who desperately tried to calm the situation, had any effect. The young man kept his eyes fixed on the floor, utterly lost. Meanwhile, Silei remained cold and composed, stating that the outcome was still far from over. He had one more surprise waiting for the defeated man. A carefully wrapped package containing the leftovers from the meal was prepared and handed to Sansao as a supposed gift, celebrating the business deal. Sansao exploded with rage, hurling insults, and demanding to know how anyone could dare mock him like that, especially after being humiliated by the man backing Silei. Keeping a sarcastic grin on his face, Silei suggested that if Sansao didn't feel like eating it right there, he could always take the leftovers home. With a cynical pat on his rival's shoulder, Silei mocked the young man's brilliance for single-handedly ruining his own opportunities. The tension shifted once again with the arrival of a woman connected to the Wei family, leaving the man in red visibly stunned. Even Master Yul appeared surprised, wondering whether she would be taking over the group's financial operations. Representing the Wei family, Weon approached the woman nearby, introducing herself with a warm smile and publicly declaring her friendship with Silei. Yul's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. He eagerly grabbed the young woman's hand, treating that friendship as the foundation of a new alliance. Watching everything unfold, Sansao felt fear creeping into his chest as he struggled to understand how someone as seemingly ordinary as Silei could move so comfortably among people of such influence. The realization that Silei maintained connections with the elite left him completely bewildered. Before taking his leave, Master Yul apologized to the pair and offered to prepare a private dinner exclusively for them. The luxurious proposal made Silei pause for a moment and reflect on the true value and reach of the card in his possession. Silei accepted the offer immediately, recognizing the clear advantage of strengthening those connections. Meanwhile, Weon, visibly charmed, interpreted his actions as genuine admiration. Excited by the arrangement, Master Yul personally escorted them to the restaurant's most prestigious table while already planning the feast. Time passed, and the atmosphere changed dramatically once they left the restaurant. What had started as a business gathering turned into a scene of collective drunken chaos. Supported by a waiter, Master Yul staggered alongside the couple as all three stumbled through a disorderly spectacle of toasts, laughter, and confusion. Silei kept insisting that everyone should continue drinking, but Weon tried to intervene, arguing that he was already completely wasted. Ignoring every warning, Silei broke free and stumbled toward Yul, laughing loudly while bragging about his abilities as the waiter and the young woman watched the embarrassing display unfold. Lost in an alcoholic haze, Master Yul suddenly decided to explain how their friendship had begun. He launched into a wildly exaggerated story about Silei, rescuing him from a violent attack in a dark alley, describing the heroic act with so much enthusiasm that the young man nearly turned red from embarrassment over the obvious lie. The waiter, exhausted and barely able to keep Yul standing, simply watched the drunken fantasy play out. Although she found the story completely unbelievable, Weon eventually accepted responsibility for getting Siley home safely. The trip was filled with laughter and nonsense as Siley drifted between demanding more alcohol and rambling incoherently, leaving the blonde exhausted and utterly confused about what was happening. Despite her irritation with everyone else's drunkenness, she displayed remarkable patience. She barked orders for the young man to pull himself together while firmly holding him by the shoulders and guiding him toward the vehicle. Her only goal was simple. Once they got through the front door, the nightmare would finally be over. Meanwhile, outside, Master Yule and the waiter remained sprawled across the sidewalk, completely incapable of moving. Under the lonely glow of the moonlight, the scene looked like a portrait of total abandonment. The journey back was torture. Nearly an hour passed before they finally reached their destination after a chaotic trip. With considerable effort, Weon managed to remove Siley's clothes and settle him into the comfort of a bed. The silence of the night slowly closed around them. The awakening was brutal. Siley opened his eyes through the mental fog of a vicious hangover, struggling to piece together fragments of the previous night. He slowly sat up, pressing both hands against his temples in an attempt to ease the pounding pressure inside his head. What he didn't expect was the greeting waiting for him. A figure suddenly rushed toward him with strange intent. Startled, Siley jumped in panic, only to realize he was being pinned down by Darlin, a large dog that was enthusiastically licking him while practically climbing on top of him. His shocked yell echoed through the house, immediately drawing attention, while Siley struggled to free himself from the animal, which seemed determined to treat him like a giant chew toy. Weon watched the entire scene with an amused smile. Furious, and still half-drunk from the night before, the young man nudged the dog away with his foot and demanded to know what she and the animal were doing there. Remaining perfectly calm, Weon simply pointed around the room and reminded him that he was the one in her house. Unable to understand how he had ended up there, Siley sat frozen while absent-mindedly petting the dog's fur and trying to make sense of the situation. Weon explained that the drinking session with Master Yule had been so legendary the night before that he had passed out the moment his head touched the pillow, without putting up even the slightest resistance. She explained that she had gone through considerable trouble to get him home safely, but since he lived in the opposite direction and she had no idea where his house keys were, she had no choice but to take him in. A realization suddenly struck Siley as he desperately tried to keep the secret of his unlimited credit card hidden. His plan to get Master Yule drunk had completely backfired. Panic immediately consumed Siley. He struggled to understand how a fortune that was supposed to be protected had vanished so effortlessly during his drunken rampage. Suddenly, the atmosphere around him changed. A crimson, oppressive mist emerged from nowhere, surrounding him and instantly driving the tension to its peak. A wave of agony struck without warning. Siley collapsed to his knees, writhing in pain as he clutched his left eye. Standing before him was the imposing figure of his mentor, watching coldly while declaring that this punishment was merely the beginning of the price he would pay for such outrageous recklessness. Siley's scream echoed through the void. The mentor had isolated the entire space. There wasn't a single soul nearby who could witness what was happening or come to his aid. Even while collapsed in agony, the young man forced himself to look up. Clearly furious over the previous night's irresponsibility, the mentor demanded gratitude, claiming that losing only one eye was an act of mercy. Blinded by both pain and rising fury, Siley grabbed the scepter floating before him. With clenched teeth, he fired back at every accusation, openly challenging the mentor's authority. He shouted that if the mentor didn't follow the very rules he preached, then he had no right to demand obedience from anyone else. The argument escalated rapidly. As his thoughts gradually cleared amid the chaos, Siley suddenly remembered a crucial clause in the contract. His earnings quota was calculated weekly. "Today is only the 4th day," Siley shouted, pointing directly at the mentor. "The deadline for any punishment is collection day, and there are still 3 days left. You're breaking the agreement." Faced with such unexpected resistance, the mentor froze in surprise. The moment Siley noticed that hesitation, he realized something important. The scepter wasn't an absolute force. If the power standing before him could be restrained by the very laws it had established, then the balance of the game had shifted. Slowly, the young man rose to his feet, ready to use the mentor's own system of control against him. Pointing his finger directly at the entity, Siley challenged the mentor and demanded to know what move came next in the face of the unbreakable laws created by darkness itself. The scepter showed no signs of intimidation. If anything, It seemed to have expected this level of audacity from such a cunning individual. The pressure radiating from the god of night began to fluctuate. Then, with a simple snap of his fingers, the mentor gave in. The pain in Sile's eye vanished instantly, and his vision was restored. The mentor wasted no time getting to the point. If Sile failed to recover the missing 800 before collection day, he would pay the price with his eyesight. The scepter drifted closer until it was eye level with the young man, pointing its staff at him in open mockery. It reminded him that living in darkness would be an unbearable burden and that he should, ironically, be grateful for this second chance. With a sinister smile, the scepter dissolved into thin air. Sile remained alone, fully convinced that his mentor wanted nothing more than to see him ruined. Panic surged through him. His heart pounded violently, and a cold sweat ran down his body. He only had a few days to recover the required amount. The sound of Weon's voice calling impatiently from the bathroom, demanding breakfast, finally snapped him out of his trance. The moment he saw her, Sile tried to hide his nervousness. Noticing how close they were standing, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a possible way out of his predicament. In a clumsy attempt to buy time, he offered her some cookies. She immediately called him an idiot. The second he took a bite himself, he realized the catastrophic mistake. They weren't cookies, they were dog treats. Spitting out as much as he could, Sile was left with the bitter taste of both the snack and his situation. Later that morning, beneath the bright sunlight, he made his way toward an imposing white mansion. His mind remained completely fixated on the $800 debt. Every step felt like part of a countdown to his survival. Adjusting his purple and gold Lakers cap, he walked with determination, fully aware that every second now mattered. A friend had recommended a promising job that paid $300 an hour, which left him both excited and suspicious. He knew something that lucrative was unlikely to be easy. The moment he rang the doorbell, the door flew open unexpectedly. A woman's terrified scream echoed through the entrance. Before he could react, Sile was sent flying several feet backward by the force of the situation. A blonde woman appeared in the doorway and quickly corrected the misunderstanding. She was apparently shouting at someone named Miss Jean and clarified that he was only the hired tutor, not the person she had been afraid of. Realizing her mistake, the woman immediately apologized. Adjusting her oval-shaped glasses, she awkwardly admitted that she had confused him with someone else. Still nursing a bloody nose from the impact, Sile did his best to maintain his composure. The woman, Zhang Mei, stepped forward and offered him a hand with a conciliatory smile. Although annoyed by the pain, Sile accepted her help, forced a smile, and assured her that he was fine. Grateful for his understanding, she invited him inside and closed the massive oak door behind them. The interior of the residence was magnificent. Sile settled onto a velvet sofa while Mei reviewed his resume. She carefully noted that he was 20 years old and had maintained an outstanding academic record at Dawn College. Comparisons to other young people from similar backgrounds naturally crossed her mind. Without wasting any time, Mei informed him that he could begin immediately because she had urgent business obligations to attend to. The speed of the decision caught Sile completely off guard. He had expected at least some questions about his qualifications or teaching abilities before being hired. Mei quickly explained that she had no need for technical evaluations because the purpose of the position was extremely specific. With surprising bluntness, she revealed that the job existed solely to supervise her daughter. In reality, he was little more than a highly paid babysitter. Noticing the confusion written all over his face, she leaned forward and asked whether he understood the assignment. Sile nodded. In response, she handed him $600 up front as payment for the day. At that moment, the severe expression on Zhang Mei's face softened, revealing traces of concern and guilt. Somewhat reluctantly, she explained that the unusually high pay was directly related to the difficulty of dealing with her daughter. The truth soon came out. Her daughter had already driven away 5 tutors that very week because of repeated violent incidents. Although fully aware of the risk, Sile maintained his confidence and promised that the girl would be in good hands. Adjusting her glasses once more, Zhang Mei visibly relaxed after hearing his assurance and prepared to leave. Before departing, she informed him that her daughter's name was Zhan Liang Lian, that she was currently on the 2nd floor, and that any problems should be reported to her immediately without hesitation. After his employer left, Sile climbed the mansion's massive oak staircase. The hallway upstairs immediately revealed the personality of his student. The walls were covered in doodles, graffiti, and random scribbles. The anarchy symbol painted on her bedroom door served as a clear warning sign. He reached for the iron doorknob, but before he could even turn it, a deafening blast of sound erupted from the other side, nearly throwing him backward. The shockwave sent him crashing to the floor. At that moment, the weight of the job truly hit him. Any enthusiasm for work vanished instantly, replaced by an internal complaint about his terrible luck, like someone finally realizing the problem was far bigger than the paycheck suggested. Siley crawled toward the doorway and carefully pushed the door open, but the sonic assault continued without mercy. Refusing to stand up, he crawled across the floor until he reached the device responsible for the noise. With a quick motion, he switched it off, finally enjoying a moment of relief as he struggled to catch his breath. When he stood up, however, the sight before him left him frozen. The room looked like the hideout of a troubled soul. Disturbing posters covered the walls, piles of trash were scattered everywhere, and strange objects cluttered every corner. In the center of the room was a drawing of a split skull that gave the place the atmosphere of a haunted house. Sitting with her back turned, completely absorbed in her phone and oblivious to the intrusion, was the girl herself. Her headphones isolated her from the world as she muttered to herself and gestured wildly at her screen. She vaguely reminded Siley of someone he had met before, but this girl seemed to possess a far more explosive personality. When she finally noticed his presence, her response was anything but welcoming. With intimidating coldness, she demanded to know who he was and why he was there. Siley attempted a friendly introduction, but she immediately cut him off and returned to ignoring him as though he were just another piece of furniture. Assuming her mother had hired yet another tutor, she pulled out a stack of cash, tossed it onto the table, and casually informed him that it was $1,000 more than the agreed payment. Take it and leave. The order came without hesitation, as if she were throwing away an inconvenience. Siley stood there staring at the money. The amount was tempting, but the way it had been offered, as a bribe to make him disappear, struck directly at his pride. The internal conflict was obvious. The money would solve part of his immediate crisis, but accepting it meant surrendering to the whims of a spoiled teenager. Impulse won. He picked up the bills while she smirked with satisfaction, convinced she had successfully gotten rid of him. However, when he found himself standing alone in the middle of the room again, the feeling of victory disappeared. Placing his hands on the floor, he felt the weight of the decision and tried to figure out his next move in this strange game. Then, without warning, Siley stood up. He walked to the door and switched off the lights, plunging the room into darkness. The girl reacted instantly, shouting in outrage at his audacity. Completely unfazed, Siley crossed the room and threw the curtains wide open, flooding the space with sunlight. Laughing to himself, he commented that sunlight was essential for healthy development and that wasting electricity in the middle of the day was ridiculous. He then dropped onto the black sofa with infuriating calmness, fully determined to teach the spoiled girl some basic manners. The student was stunned by the nerve of her new tutor. Shouting at the top of her lungs, she demanded to know why he was still there after taking the money she had offered. Siley responded with a cynical grin. Yes, he intended to keep the money. And yes, he fully intended to hand it directly to her mother. The idea of a complete stranger deciding what happened to her money made the girl's blood boil. Siley simply shrugged and pointed out that if the cash had come from her mother in the first place, then technically it wasn't hers anyway. He leaned back comfortably and ignored her complaints while she buried herself in her phone once again. It was exactly 1 to 22 p.m. His plan was simple: complete the 2-hour tutoring session, take a short break, and stay until 3:30 p.m. Putting on his own headphones, Siley gave her space, though the girl's hostility continued to grow. In a deliberately provocative tone, he asked whether she had any genuine interest in learning anything at all, pointing out that education was probably her only real escape route. The response was immediate. She charged at him with clenched fists. Grabbing him by the shirt, she yanked him off the couch in a fit of blind rage while Siley shouted and struggled to restrain the out-of-control teenager before the situation turned even more embarrassing. Realizing he needed a strategy to stop the chaos, Siley proposed a challenge, a Mobile Legends match. If he won, she would stop being a nuisance and cooperate. If she won, he would leave immediately and never come back. Confident in her epic-tier skills, the girl accepted with a sinister smile, completely certain she would humiliate the intruder. Their fingers flew across their screens as rapid commands and tense exchanges filled the room. The first round ended in complete shock. Siley won. The girl exploded with frustration, immediately blaming internet issues and demanding a rematch. Completely unfazed, Siley simply reminded her of the deal. Losing meant honoring the agreement. Growling in anger, she threatened to complain to her mother, but despite her outrage, she accepted the challenge for another round. To earn a chance at redemption, she would have to solve 10 academic problems. To Siley's surprise, the girl didn't hesitate for a second. She snatched the book from his hands and immediately got to work with impressive focus. Just 5 minutes later, all the exercises were finished. Siley checked the answers and was shocked to discover that every single one was flawless. Feeling confident in her abilities and convinced her luck was about to change, she talked him into another match. What followed was pure humiliation. Lian lost the next 10 games in a row. She couldn't process the defeats. Frustration consumed her as she struggled to understand how someone using a hero ranked 3 tiers below hers kept crushing her repeatedly. Meanwhile, Siley controlled the game with unsettling ease, making every victory look effortless. With a satisfied grin, Siley laid down a condition. If she wanted to learn his gaming tricks, she would have to attend English lessons the following day. Out of options and boiling with rage, the girl agreed and returned to her notebooks. Watching her work, Siley couldn't resist teasing her, calling her a nerd despite how pretty she was. Without even looking up from her assignment, she fired back with a sharp remark, reminding him that being older didn't automatically mean he was better at gaming. The mood shifted instantly when a strange reflection in the window caught Siley's attention. Before he could fully process what he was seeing, he shouted for the girl to get down. At that exact moment, a wine bottle came crashing through the glass. The window exploded into shards, and the bottle smashed into the wall, leaving a massive hole behind. Siley immediately threw himself over Lian, shielding her from the impact. The girl stared at him in shock, her eyes wide as she struggled to process what had just happened. Slowly rising amid the broken glass, Siley's eyes burned with fury at the threat to their lives. Shaking uncontrollably, Lian grabbed onto his clothes, desperately seeking comfort. Then the shouting started. A man's voice echoed from outside in the courtyard, demanding that Zhang Maimei come out while hurling insults and threats at the top of his lungs. Remaining calm, Siley gently patted the girl's head and assured her that as long as she was under his protection, she had nothing to fear. Despite his reassuring words, Siley himself was confused. He had never dealt with anything remotely this violent before. While he struggled to organize his thoughts, the man outside became even louder, screaming insults at the mansion's owner and making it clear that he wasn't leaving without a confrontation. The stranger shouted that he had been stripped of everything and would take half the family's wealth as revenge. Faced with such madness, Siley suggested calling the police. Lian quickly explained that the estate's security team would handle the situation. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the sounds of guards confronting the so-called Mr. Zhu confirmed that things were under control. As the commotion continued outside, Siley tried to connect the dots. Where had he heard that name before? Then it clicked. His mind flashed back to the scene at the front door that morning, when Ms. May had mentioned her ex-husband with unmistakable hatred. Putting the pieces together, Siley asked about the girl's father. The reaction was immediate. Lian let go of him, shouted that she didn't have a father, and demanded that he stop sticking his nose where it didn't belong. At last, Siley understood the full picture. The girl's rebellious behavior wasn't just spoiled brat behavior. It was a cry for help, a response to years of neglect from a mother who never seemed to have time for her. When he confronted her with that painful truth, the atmosphere instantly grew heavy. Feeling exposed and attacked, Lian completely lost control. Fueled by anger, she began shoving Siley toward the door, insisting that his services had already been paid for and that he was no longer welcome. Siley, however, remained calm. Refusing to back down, he dropped onto the sofa with a relaxed smile and pointed out that their challenge wasn't over yet. She still had assignments to finish. Red with anger and practically glued to her phone, the girl tried to ignore him, but the fury boiling inside her made one thing obvious. For the first time in her life, she had met someone who refused to play by her rules. The tension between them reached its breaking point. On the verge of exploding, Lian declared that if he wouldn't leave, she would. Before Siley could react, she bolted toward the exit with surprising speed. Outside the house, she found a bench, curled up with her knees against her chest, and finally broke down in quiet tears. The pain left by her father's absence hit her with devastating force. Moments later, Siley appeared as if out of nowhere. Without saying much, he quietly offered her a handkerchief. She responded bitterly, accusing him of causing the entire mess, and then pretending to care afterward. Keeping a calm smile, Siley replied that if she had run away like that, it probably meant she secretly wanted someone to come after her. Annoyed, she ordered him to stop staring at her. Instead, he gently placed something into her hands, a stack of cash and the house keys. Lian hesitated, stunned by the gesture. Siley casually explained that if her mother saw her sitting there in that condition, she would genuinely panic, and maybe this small act could bring everyone a little peace. Feeling like he was crossing a line, the girl protested, insisting that he had no right to interfere in family matters. Siley, however, remained honest and straightforward. He told her that he planned to inform Mrs. May that her daughter didn't need academic tutoring and that his contract would end right there. Before leaving, he even gave her instructions about repairing the shattered window, warning her about the danger posed by the broken glass. Lian watched him walk away. For some reason, his seriousness left behind a strange sense of emptiness. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, surrounded by towering skyscrapers, Zhang Mei continued working in her office. The silence was interrupted by a notification on her phone. It was Lian, calling with an unusual hint of frustration in her voice. She informed her mother that the tutor had just quit. Then came something even more surprising, showing a level of regret that was completely unlike her. Lian asked for Silei's contact information. Mei froze. For the first time ever, her daughter, who had driven away every tutor she had ever hired, was asking to stay in touch with one of them. At the same time, Silei wandered through the city streets beneath the cover of night. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, and his stomach growled relentlessly. The 300 yuan in his pocket felt like dangerous temptation. He fought the urge to spend the money on a decent meal, forcing himself to stay disciplined. Distracted by his phone, he accidentally wandered into a dark alley undergoing construction. Before he could react, 3 figures stepped out and blocked his path. The leader, a man with greenish skin, looked strangely familiar, like a nightmare he had seen before. At his command, the other 2 thugs moved into position and surrounded Silei, cutting off every possible escape route. The disadvantage was obvious, especially with Silei still dealing with the lingering effects of his injured eye. Furious, the leader ordered an immediate attack. He blamed Silei for an insult that had taken place days earlier at Yulu restaurant. Silei tried to explain that there had been a misunderstanding, but the green-skinned man only smiled sadistically and signaled his men to move. As the 2 thugs started throwing punches, the leader observed carefully. Something about Silei's voice and mannerisms began triggering memories. Then it hit him like lightning. This was the same man he had seen weeks earlier at the Happiness Bar. Fear shot through his body. Immediately, he screamed for his men to stop. The 2 thugs froze in confusion. The leader's attitude transformed instantly. One moment he was an aggressor. The next, he was practically a servant. He began apologizing frantically, trying to explain the attack as nothing more than a means of survival. With blood running from his mouth, Silei wiped his lip with a rough motion and shot a murderous glare at the trio. The heavier thug couldn't understand what was happening. Shouting in disbelief, he demanded to know why they were backing down from a loser. He never got to finish the sentence. A brutal punch landed on the back of his head. The terrified leader immediately reminded the others about the destruction Silei had caused at the Happiness Bar weeks ago. The realization finally hit. Panic spread through the group. They began backing away while desperately inventing excuses, claiming they didn't want trouble with someone who might be connected to powerful, wealthy families. Deciding to abandon the mission entirely, they turned around and started leaving, attempting to preserve a shred of dignity while continuing their stream of excuses. Then fate intervened. 3 100 yuan bills, the money Silei had earned earlier, slipped from his pocket and landed on the ground. The heavyset thug spotted the opportunity. Moving quickly, he scooped up the money with a greedy grin. It was the last mistake he would make. Silei grabbed the man's wrist with crushing force. The thug froze instantly. As the pressure intensified and his arm began turning purple, Silei growled that nobody touched what belonged to him. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. He had casually thrown away millions at the Happiness Bar without a second thought. But this specific money was his lifeline. His patience finally ran out. Baring his teeth in a ferocious expression, Silei launched a savage attack, fully prepared to make the thug pay for his arrogance. Unfortunately, his limited vision betrayed him. He threw a desperate strike, missed completely, and crashed onto the pavement. For a brief moment, he was completely vulnerable. The heavyset thug stood there stunned. The green-skinned leader, however, wasted no time. He stomped onto Silei's back, pinning him to the ground with both his weight and his arrogance, while promising an unforgettable lesson. Silei refused to surrender. In one swift motion, he grabbed the leader's leg and yanked violently. The man crashed to the ground. Twisting in pain and fury, the leader ordered his 2 subordinates to finish the job. The trio charged together. A brutal storm of punches and kicks rained down on Silei. Even as he tried to shield his head, every blow landed hard, made worse by his compromised vision. Seizing an opening, the leader delivered a punch that nearly dislocated the young man's jaw. Acting purely on instinct, Siley grabbed the leader's clothing and pulled him out of the attack line. The struggle spilled onto a nearby patch of grass. Now separated from the others, Siley turned the tables. He unleashed a relentless barrage of punches on the green-skinned man, paying him back for every hit he had just taken. As the leader begged for mercy, Siley tightened his grip around the man's throat and demanded the immediate return of his money. Siley reached for a nearby brick, intending to end the fight once and for all. But the terrified leader wasn't the only obstacle standing in his way. Realizing the danger, the heavy-set thug grabbed another brick from the ground and charged at him. The pain and exhaustion finally began to take their toll. The world around Siley started spinning. His vision darkened. He felt consciousness slipping away just as the confrontation reached its most dangerous moment. The brick strike didn't bring Siley down. If anything, it only fueled the savage fury burning in his eyes. The sight alone froze the green-skinned leader in place. Between pathetic screams for mercy, the man began begging for his life, insisting that Siley could keep the money as long as he let them leave. Ignoring every plea, Siley turned his attention toward the other two thugs. Terrified, the heavyset man immediately held out the cash and launched into a frantic stream of apologies. The moment Siley bent down to retrieve his money, the trio didn't wait another second. They took off running. As they fled, their panicked voices echoed through the alley, shouting that the guy was some kind of monster. With the money finally back in his hands, Siley let out a long sigh of relief. A tired smile crossed his face. Then his body finally gave out. He collapsed motionless onto the cold pavement. Hours later, waking up felt like torture. Siley managed to open one eye with extreme difficulty. His blurred vision briefly convinced him that he had already crossed into the afterlife. Then the real terror arrived. The mentor appeared before him, announcing that his death was approaching. Spectral chains emerged from nowhere, stretching and squeezing his body while the scepter snapped its fingers, surrounding everything in a crimson mist. The nightmare shattered. A bright white hospital room replaced the horrifying vision. The faces of a doctor and a nurse stood where the spectral figure had been moments earlier. Confused, Siley tried to sit up, but the doctor immediately urged him to remain calm. The nurse explained that he had been found unconscious on the street by a group of homeless people who had brought him to the hospital. Then came the strangest detail of all. Those same homeless individuals had insisted that every dollar found on him rightfully belonged to him. The realization hit Siley instantly. He openly admitted that without his guide's intervention, his life would have ended in that alley. Extending both hands, he expressed genuine gratitude. The mentor responded with a stiffness that almost seemed awkward. As long as Siley followed the rules, he explained, he would eventually discover that the organization was, in its own cruel way, both fair and honorable. Siley stood up, set aside his glass of water, and reaffirmed his commitment. The mentor walked to the window and pulled the curtains open. The glowing nighttime skyline of Gudon stretched beyond the glass. Then, the entity turned toward him with genuine curiosity. It questioned Siley's entire philosophy. The young man seemed to believe that wealth was nothing more than the right to waste money. He threw bills into the air for entertainment, spent recklessly without thinking, and treated fortune as an endless toy. Yet despite all that, he had nearly triggered a catastrophe trying to manage a mere 800 yuan. The contradiction fascinated the mentor. Up until then, Siley had suspected that the ultimate purpose of that mentorship was simply to dispose of useless slaves, but the experience of that night changed his perspective. Ignoring the cruelty of his instructor's methods, he declared with a determination that even surprised the entity that he wanted to learn every law of the black card and carry out its tasks with precision. More than that, he stated that he would achieve his own financial independence, earning enough money to sever all ties with the god of the dark night forever. Truly stunned by his disciple's boldness, the mentor dropped his distant attitude and listened with complete attention. The mentor had already realized that the boy was different from the rest, which was the real reason the god of the night had taken an interest in him. 1 week after their first conversation, the young man was fast asleep when his phone started vibrating on the nightstand. It was a call from Zhang Lian. Without a second thought, he ignored it, pulled the covers back over himself, and sank into the comfort of his luxurious bed, enjoying the kind of rest only his own home could provide. The silence was broken by persistent knocking at the apartment door. He tried to ignore it, muffling the sound with his pillow and shouting angrily for whoever it was to leave, since he still needed time to recover from his recent hospitalization. But the noise wouldn't stop. The man on the other side of the door kept knocking, his voice full of impatience. With no other choice, the young man got up, straightened himself out, and unlocked the door. A stern-looking man was standing there. Right behind him, the girl walked in without hesitation, made herself comfortable on the couch, and placed a huge black thermos on the table. When he questioned the timing of her visit, she simply shrugged and said that neighbors didn't need a special reason to stop by. She explained that she had come to see him as soon as she heard he was finally back from the hospital. Pushing the drink toward him, she insisted that he should have it while it was still hot. The young man obeyed, but the moment the liquid touched his tongue, he grimaced and nearly spat it out on instinct, looking like he had just tasted something horrible. He demanded to know what nightmare she had made him drink. She only smiled and revealed that it was homemade herbal soup, packed with ingredients she had personally chosen to help with his recovery. She explained that the ginger was essential for helping his body recover from the heavy blood loss. He stared at the cup with a mixture of fear and respect, noticing only a few pieces of carrot floating in the broth. The young woman took the thermos back from his hands and reminded him with a sly smile that every good deed deserved an equally good return. Siley immediately picked up on the hidden meaning in her tone and concluded that he was dealing with someone extremely vindictive, especially when she insisted on serving him a second cup, this time with a little less ginger. Satisfied after watching him swallow the mixture, she happily announced that her family had kicked her out of the house and that she was finally free. The news hit the young man like an unexpected gift. If she was free, then his path back to the university was guaranteed. The problem now was money, since his budget for the week had completely vanished. While he tried to figure out how he was going to survive the next few days, his phone kept buzzing non-stop with messages from Li Liang. He had no idea what she wanted, but the girl beside him noticed his irritation and cut him off, telling him to focus on his studies before she lost her patience. Curious, Siley asked who had been bothering her, but the conversation quickly shifted. Suddenly, he had an idea and used the opportunity to invite Weon to a nightclub. The suggestion was so random that she froze in surprise. Hours later, night had already fallen, and the two of them were driving across the city in a shiny red BMW. The car stopped in front of the club, and the moment they stepped out, they attracted attention from every direction. Weon immediately seized the chance to make fun of him, pointing out how over-the-top his appearance was. Embarrassed, the young man admitted that it was his first time going to a place like that with someone else, which was why he had dressed up so much. She was genuinely shocked to realize that despite everything, he was a complete rookie when it came to nightlife. Siley hesitated, held back by his shyness, but she motioned for him to keep going. He was still trying to figure out whether his companion was actually enjoying the idea. The driver confirmed that he would return in 4 hours, and they headed inside. Their luxurious appearance stood out from everything around them, but at the same time, it commanded immediate respect as they climbed the stairs leading to the most popular club in the city. As soon as they walked through the doors, they were greeted by an entire line of hostesses. Siley silently thanked the person who had given him the suggestion earlier. It was a foolproof way to spend money and possibly increase his relationship level with Sun Yue. He had no intention of wasting the opportunity. His companion, meanwhile, watched him with a puzzled expression, unsure whether this was an actual date or just some kind of show. The place was pure extravagance. Massive chandeliers, flawless decorations, and ridiculously expensive bottles of champagne everywhere. The moment they sat down on a couch in the main lounge, a line of beautiful women appeared in front of them. Siley was completely stunned, unable to comprehend the scale of that welcome. He tried to play it cool, claiming that he was only there to have fun and that all of this was unnecessary. But an employee approached with a bright smile and informed him that Mr. S had requested the full service package. Siley smiled and tried to act as if this were the most normal thing in the world, while his companion finally realized what was going on and instantly changed her attitude. Crossing her arms, she huffed in indignation and declared, with obvious hurt in her voice, that she finally understood the real reason he had been so determined to bring her to that place. Siley tried to explain himself, swearing there had been a misunderstanding, but the young woman wouldn't listen. She shot back that he had deeply disappointed her and walked straight toward the exit, leaving him frozen in embarrassment. When he tried to explain that it was his first time in a place like that, and that he had no idea how any of it worked, she cut him off sharply. With heavy sarcasm in her voice, she ordered the women to serve the gentleman the way he deserved before storming out. The moment she disappeared, the group of women rushed toward him, surrounding him and pulling him into the middle of the lounge. Siley fought his way out of the chaos and ran outside, shouting that he needed to catch up with his friend and explain himself, but the damage had already been done. As he sprinted down the hallway, an unexpected sight stopped him in his tracks. A young girl was running toward him, stumbling over her own feet and desperately crying for help. The collision was unavoidable. The girl crashed into him, and as he caught her to keep her from falling, Siley instantly recognized her face. There was no mistake. It was his sister. She stared at him in shock before throwing herself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably, while Siley stood there stunned, trying to understand what she was doing in a place like that. He was still trying to calm her down when a huge, intimidating figure appeared in the hallway. The man seemed to be hunting for the girl, and the moment he spotted them, he demanded that she come back immediately, claiming that her uncle was waiting for her. The girl began trembling uncontrollably and hid behind her brother. Siley stepped forward to shield her and coldly warned the stranger to keep his distance. The fat man burst into a nasty laugh, mocking the situation. He didn't believe for a second that Siley was actually her brother, arguing that if they were really family, she would never be working in a place like that. Completely ignoring the warning, the brute kept moving forward, demanding that the young man stop the act and get out of the way. Siley was on the verge of backing down when one of the club managers suddenly appeared, stumbling over himself with apologies to Mr. Senator. The employee tried to smooth things over, explaining that the girl was still inexperienced and that a replacement could be arranged immediately. Senator wasn't interested. He stepped forward and tried to lure the girl with promises of wealth while she clung tightly to Siley's hand, too terrified to let go. The fat man let out a sadistic laugh, ridiculing Siley's persistence. Then he delivered an ultimatum. If she wasn't in his room within 10 minutes, there would be serious consequences. The moment he left, the club employee turned his frustration on the girl, threatening to fire her and blacklist her from the entire industry if she didn't go beg for the boss's forgiveness. Grabbing her by the arm, he began dragging her towards Senator's room by force. Siley couldn't stand watching it any longer. He stepped in, firmly grabbing the employee's wrist and growling that she was his sister. The employee, completely oblivious to the seriousness of the situation, tried to downplay everything, claiming that this kind of drama was bad for business. 2 other female employees arrived and tried to pressure the girl into obeying, arguing that she desperately needed the job. Feeling the weight of the pressure, the girl pulled herself free and reluctantly walked toward Mr. Senator's door. Siley tried to stop her, but she knocked and asked for permission to enter, hoping to calm the man down. The moment she crossed the doorway, Senator's alcohol-slurred voice echoed from inside. Standing outside, Siley's tension finally reached its breaking point. The thought of his sister being handed over to that disgusting man made his blood boil. Unable to contain his rage any longer, he simply kicked the door open with all his strength. The crash instantly silenced the room, and Mr. Senator, who had been enjoying his moment of power, turned pale when he saw the furious intruder standing before him. The room was packed with security guards, but Siley didn't back down. With a level of audacity that shocked everyone present, he strode across the room, dropped himself onto the couch beside Senator, and flashed a provocative grin as if he owned the place. The fat man tried to smooth things over, but Siley wasn't there to exchange pleasantries. He grabbed his sister's hand, determined to get her out of there, and loudly announced that their time in that dump was over. The exit was instantly blocked by a wall of guards. Maintaining his arrogant attitude, Senator suggested that Siley stay and enjoy himself, trying to trade the girl's freedom for a night of luxury. Without losing his composure, Siley raised the stakes. He offered to cover every expense in the room if they simply let his sister leave. The fat man burst out laughing, amused by the attempt at heroism, and issued a cruel challenge. He would accept the deal if Siley could drink every bottle of alcohol sitting on the table. Siley answered with a dry laugh. He grabbed one of the bottles, locked eyes with the man, and emptied it in a single gulp. Without hesitation, he smashed the bottle against the edge of the table, leaving only the jagged neck in his hand. In one swift motion, he lunged forward and pressed the broken glass against the fat man's throat. Silence fell over the room. The guards froze in terror. Siley ordered everyone to stay exactly where they were, making it clear that if a single person took one step forward, he would slit his hostage's throat. He shouted for someone to call the police, but instead of running away, his sister held onto him tightly, refusing to leave him behind. The loyalty in her actions, something he hadn't felt from her in years, struck Siley deeply. Keeping the improvised blade pressed against the man's jugular, he grabbed her arm and began dragging the hostage with him as they slowly made their way toward the main entrance. The tension inside the room reached a critical level when the door suddenly opened again, revealing 3 familiar faces. Siley felt his blood run cold as he recognized the trio he had beaten up in an alley some time ago. They were well-known sadists in the area, and to make matters worse, Mr. Senator introduced them with a triumphant grin, calling them his friends. The fat man, still held at glass point, immediately started shouting, ordering the trio to teach that lunatic a lesson for daring to threaten him. The leader of the group, a green-tinted man, stepped forward with the clear intention of intimidating Silai. The fat man shouted at the top of his lungs, demanding that the young man drop to his knees and beg for forgiveness, or be beaten to death. However, the moment the gang leader locked eyes with Silai, his expression changed completely. Instead of attacking, he froze. Silence filled the room as the three men stood there like statues, completely ignoring Mr. Senator's hysterical orders. In a sudden move that stunned everyone present, the gang leader threw a brutal punch straight into Mr. Senator's face. The impact was so powerful that the fat man collapsed instantly, sprawled across the floor without making a sound. The silence that followed was eerie. Nobody was even sure whether he was still breathing. Without paying the slightest attention to the fallen hostage, the green-tinted man approached Silai with an unexpectedly submissive and almost affectionate attitude. In a nervous voice, he asked why Silai hadn't informed them that he would be stopping by to inspect the business. As he casually stepped on Senator's motionless body, he repeatedly apologized for the old man's behavior. Silai quickly realized that the fear he had planted in those criminals in the past was still very much alive. Taking advantage of the authority the moment gave him, he decided to push things even further. Pretending to be furious, he began cornering the green-tinted man, throwing accusations at him over old incidents. Clearly intimidated and desperate to avoid another conflict, the man could only laugh nervously while attempting to explain himself, humbly accepting every accusation Silai threw his way. The sight was so ridiculous that anyone watching found it hard not to be amused. Still dazed from the punch, the fat man slowly regained consciousness in the middle of the surreal scene. Unable to understand why his own subordinates were kneeling, he muttered a confused question, only to be silenced by another punch from the gang leader. Shouting at the top of his lungs, the green-tinted man demanded that he immediately apologize to Lord Situ and the young woman beside him. Hidden behind her brother, the girl felt her face burn with embarrassment and tried to explain herself, but Silai cut her off, sharply informing everyone that she was his sister. The green-tinted man turned pale and wouldn't stop apologizing for such a terrible misunderstanding. Then, in a slightly cruel display, Silai ordered the fat man to pay for 10 dozen beers. His sister, shocked by the absurd amount, tried to object, arguing that it was a complete waste of money. Silai ignored her practicality and raised the stakes even higher, demanding that the entire club menu be charged to the fat man's account. With the situation finally settled, Silai and the girl headed toward the exit, escorted by the three thugs, who now bowed dramatically in exaggerated displays of obedience. Still lying on the floor, the fat man watched in complete disbelief, unable to understand why his own men were trembling in front of that young man. The green-tinted leader simply sighed as a chill ran down his spine. A traumatic memory resurfaced. Silai charging at him without mercy, armed with a brick covered in sharp spikes. Even now, the memory remained a nightmare he preferred to bury forever. Once they were safely away from the chaos, the two found a quiet corner and sat down. The girl opened her phone and checked the balance from her most recent night of work. As she looked through the numbers on the screen, the glow of the notifications contrasted sharply with the madness of the night. In the distance, dozens of bottles delivered by the fat man remained stacked together as a reminder of the chaos they had left behind. The girl stared at the amount displayed on her phone, stunned by how much money had accumulated, but she chose not to dwell on it. Instead, she focused on her brother's recent success. Reaching out, she gently touched his hand and finally confessed that she had never been there by choice. Her job had always been limited to selling drinks, and she had never crossed the line beyond that. Silai squeezed her hand reassuringly, trying to calm her while searching for answers that had remained buried for years. Why had she stayed silent? Why had she never tried to contact him after moving away? Their conversation continued deep into the night, gradually revealing the weight of the years they had lost. By the time the first rays of sunlight appeared on the horizon, the story of their family tragedy had finally been told. After they moved away, their uncle had died not long afterward. Then their aunt lost everything to a con artist and eventually suffered a fatal heart attack. Silai listened in silence, unable to understand why she had never reached out to him when she had always been considered part of the family. Tears filled the girl's eyes as she shared the final chapter of her suffering. Their mother was terminally ill, and the only chance of saving her life was an extremely expensive surgery. She admitted that she had never asked for help because she didn't want to become a burden, despite the impossible cost. Siley felt his chest burn with guilt and anger. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had abandoned her to face everything alone, and the thought of what she might have endured in that den of corruption pushed him dangerously close to losing control. He rose to his feet, tension visible in every muscle, while she tried to convince him that everything was under control. Even while recounting the darkest moments of her life, she maintained a fragile but stubborn smile, carrying the innocent hope that, with enough effort, fate would finally turn in her favor. Siley felt genuine relief at his sister's optimism. They said goodbye with a promise to meet again soon in the hallways of the university where they both studied. After she left, he remained alone with his thoughts. The challenge ahead was enormous, somehow finding the astronomical amount of money needed for her mother's surgery. Still, he made up his mind that he wouldn't rest until he had paid that debt back to life itself. The silence was suddenly shattered by shouting coming from the hallway. Siley rushed outside, only to find complete chaos. The trio of thugs, led by the green-tinted man, were running in panic while a bottle flew through the air and exploded against the leader's head. The green-tinted man screamed in pain and fury, shouting that the young woman had finally pushed him past the limits of his patience. A short-haired blonde figure emerged from one of the rooms, her features almost boyish in appearance. She carried herself with such arrogance that even the thugs seemed intimidated, backing away as she advanced toward them. The atmosphere grew even heavier when one of the henchmen made the fatal mistake of mentioning her mother. Her anger flared instantly, but the moment she noticed Siley watching from the shadows, her attitude changed completely. Smiling, she ran toward him as if they were old friends. Siley, however, refused to play along. Instead of accepting the embrace, he grabbed her by the neck and lifted her off the ground with absolute authority. She didn't seem bothered by the aggression at all, maintaining a challenging attitude that bordered on flirting. The tension finally broke when Siley mentioned a payment of 300 luens for a certain service. The mood shifted immediately, and the trio of troublemakers quickly surrendered, promising complete obedience. The peace didn't last long. Attention soon returned to their studies. A math textbook opened to page 12, where Liang Lian was still struggling with a simple problem. Siley's frustration was obvious. He kept ordering everyone to stop crowding around him, but the group, including several friends who found the situation hilarious, continued pestering him and openly mocking the strange makeup of his social circle. Noticing how unsettled he was, Liang Lian grabbed both of his hands and demanded an explanation. Running out of patience, Siley casually admitted that he had gone to the club for a date. Her reaction was immediate. She exploded in blind fury, demanding to know how he could possibly have the nerve to show up accompanied by another woman. The chaos of the night reached its peak when Siley, in the middle of the argument, was struck by a devastating realization. Weon, the girl he had completely abandoned at the nightclub after the humiliating scene. The shock hit him instantly. He jumped off the couch, let out a panicked yell, and lunged for his phone as if his life depended on it. Outside, the city had become a ghost town. With no transportation available, he found himself stranded in the middle of nowhere, furious at himself and convinced the situation had gone far beyond repair. Meanwhile, Weon stood waiting on the sidewalk, tasting the bitterness of disappointment. She had given him the benefit of the doubt. She had believed he was different. Now all she saw was a guy who had badly overestimated his ability to handle everything around him. A black Mercedes pulled up in front of her. The driver politely apologized for the wait. Still boiling with anger, she ordered him to take her straight home. The driver hesitated before revealing that it wouldn't be possible. Before she could question him, Wayne's calm smile from behind the wheel delivered news that changed everything. By order of the family patriarch, she was being taken directly to the airport. Confusion quickly gave way to shock. Wayne explained that after the negotiations with Ethar, her future had already been decided: Europe. In a rare display of trust, her father had placed the family's overseas business operations in her hands, believing she was finally ready for the responsibility. She sat frozen, mouth slightly open, trying to process the pride her father was now showing toward her. Her hand trembled as she picked up her phone to call home. Then the screen lit up with Siley's name. The dilemma left her motionless. When she finally answered, she was immediately bombarded by his desperate apologies. Deep down, a secret satisfaction began to grow inside her. The fact that he had gone out of his way to find her proved that she wasn't someone he could simply discard. As he spoke, a flood of memories flashed through her mind like scenes from a movie. The spa incident, all the hardships they had endured together, and the frantic run to the restaurant. She became so absorbed in those memories that when Siley finally stopped talking, a heavy silence settled between them. Waiting for a response she barely knew how how to put into words. Using the sharpest tone she could muster, she scolded him for daring to disrespect someone of her status. Meanwhile, Siley, cornered inside a men's restroom, simply agreed with everything she said, swallowing nervously and accepting every lecture without protest. Trying to ease the tension, he suggested another dinner date, this time at a real restaurant. The proposal touched her heart. Even so, she had no choice but to shut it down. She was leaving. The news hit Siley like a bomb. Clearly worried, he immediately fired off question after question about where she was going, how long she would stay, and when she planned to return. She, on the other hand, remained calm, finding his obvious concerns somewhat amusing. On impulse, she invited him to come with her, but the financial burden weighing on him instantly stopped him cold. His expression fell at once, revealing just how serious his situation really was. Sensing his hesitation, she laughed softly and made it clear that she was only joking before advising him to relax. After a few more moments of light conversation, they said their goodbyes, with Siley asking her to let him know as soon as she landed. When the call ended, a genuine smile appeared on Wion's face, brightening her expression as the car continued through the glowing city streets. Elsewhere, inside a luxurious room, her eccentric and powerful father finished a phone call of his own. Clearly pleased to know that his daughter was under the protection of someone he trusted, he turned toward two strangers waiting for instructions and gave the signal. Their operation could finally begin. Leaving the drama with Sun Meow Meow behind him, Siley finally returned to the university. His arrival did not go unnoticed. Whispers spread through the hallways among the freshmen and the rest of the student body. After being absent for so long, the young man walked across campus wearing a rare, relaxed expression, carrying a smile that nobody had seen on his face for months. The campus was buzzing with talk about him. Some of the female students thought Siley was a little strange, but they couldn't deny his good looks or the effortless charm with which he handed out smiles and flirtatious glances wherever he went. The atmosphere was electric, and he walked with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what kind of effect he had on people. Sensen, as the upperclassmen called him, had become something of a local legend, but Siley's mind was focused on something else entirely. He needed to strengthen his relationship with his sister and make sure his finances were stable enough for both of them to live comfortably. His eyes scanned the courtyard until he spotted a familiar silhouette standing beneath a centuries-old oak tree. The last time he had seen her, she had been dressed like a mountain climber. Now she was wearing a sailor-style uniform. A small grin appeared on Siley's face. He couldn't help thinking that the girl had a peculiar talent for disguises. Just as he was about to approach her, a scarlet-haired young man, whose style vaguely reminded him of Sun Meow Meow, cut across the courtyard and headed straight for the tree. The newcomer appeared carrying an enormous bouquet of red roses. With blind confidence, he presented them to her and launched straight into the cliché question of whether she would be his girlfriend. Clearly uncomfortable, the young woman lowered her gaze and politely declined. The young man refused to take the hint. Instead, he launched into an arrogant speech for everyone nearby to hear. He bragged that it had been love at first sight. He boasted about songs he had written, exclusive dates he had arranged, and how he was willing to spend every penny of his family's fortune just to win her over. In his own mind, he was the very definition of handsome and successful. What he completely failed to notice was that the young woman, her hands trembling as they gripped her skirt, was seconds away from exploding in frustration. She tried to walk away, visibly disturbed by his persistence, but the man used his larger frame to block her path. Then things got worse. With an air of superiority, he began making comments about her personal life and her nighttime job. Leaning closer, he smugly suggested that if she gave him a kiss, all her financial problems would disappear. That was enough. Watching the scene with growing disgust, Siley stepped forward and blocked the man's advance. Without even bothering to see who had interrupted him, the redhead tried to shove Siley aside. Siley didn't budge. With complete conviction, he declared that he was the girl's older brother. For a brief moment, she looked stunned by the statement, but she didn't deny it. The aggressor burst into mocking laughter. He claimed to know for a fact that she had no relatives and tried to intimidate Siley, telling him to get lost and stop pretending to be some hero with money that supposedly solved nothing. Siley didn't waste another second. He grabbed his sister's hand and pulled her away from the man. As they walked off, the redhead pulled out his phone. In a display of pure arrogance, he began investigating who Siley was, determined to use his connections to ruin him. Once they were far enough away, Siley let go of her hand. Exhausted and irritated, he demanded to know why she kept allowing people like that to bother her. He scolded her for the excessive patience she had shown ever since childhood, pointing out that it only attracted abusive people who took advantage of her kindness. The girl remained silent. Hearing him repeatedly call her sister stirred an old memory. She remembered the promise they had made as children, that when they grew up, they would get married. Back then, Siley had agreed with a smile, never imagining that 10 years later she would still look at him with that same sparkle in her eyes, holding on to a promise that he seemed to have forgotten completely or reduced to nothing more than a sibling bond. Siley noticed the unusual expression on Yaya's face. For a brief moment, an uncomfortable sense of nostalgia washed over him, pulling him back into the past. Trying to break the awkward silence, he suddenly jumped in front of her, made an exaggerated funny face, and asked why she was staring at him so strangely. Yaya laughed. The gesture struck her as wonderfully ridiculous. With a gentle smile, she assured him that everything was fine and that he didn't need to worry. After waving goodbye, she hurried off, leaving Siley standing there alone with the weight of his concerns. The cost of her mother's surgery still stretched before him like an impossible financial abyss. Later, beneath the orange glow of a Gudon sunset, Siley sat inside his apartment locked in a verbal battle with his mentor over the resources provided by the god of the night. The discussion centered on the black card, a highly restricted privilege, and the strict rules governing its use. With almost excessive patience, the mentor explained the unbreakable line between permitted social expenses and direct financial assistance. Siley searched desperately for loopholes, trying to find a legal way to access the enormous sum of money he needed. Before long, however, he realized the effort was pointless. There simply wasn't a way around the rules. Exhausted and feeling defeated, Siley was about to leave when the mentor told him to wait. Curious, Siley reached into his pocket and, with renewed boldness, played one final card. He suggested treating the transfer as a loan backed by a promissory note, arguing that the money technically wouldn't qualify as a direct gift that way. The mentor froze. The cynical smile disappeared from his face as he processed the young man's logic. After a tense silence, the entity accepted the technical premise of the proposal. Siley's relief didn't last long. The approval came with a look that made it clear the price of that flexibility would be collected with heavy interest. Without hesitation, the mentor delivered a dark warning. Was Siley truly seeking his own destruction? Confused, Siley stared back until the explanation came cold and direct. Any loan from that source carried an outrageous 40% interest rate. Once he translated the numbers into reality, Siley froze. For every 100 coins borrowed, he would owe 140. Borrowing the 880,000 needed for the surgery would leave him with a debt of well over $1 million, a figure so massive that a lifetime of manual labor might not be enough to repay it. The mentor was visibly exhausted from repeating the same rules. The black card was a tool designed for specific expenses, never an investment fund or a source of personal financial aid. Any attempt to use it outside its intended purpose would result in the immediate annihilation of the slave. The warning couldn't have been clearer. Trying that route would be both financial and physical suicide. Siley got the message. If he couldn't use the card as a crutch, then he would have to find his own source of wealth and fast. One detail, however, caught his attention. Why was the mentor answering his questions with such unusual patience and so many details? When Siley confronted him about it, the entity hesitated, unable to come up with a convincing answer. Then, in a burst of irritation, he threw out an insult, calling him a red chinchilla before vanishing into thin air. Left alone with his thoughts racing, Siley desperately tried to figure out a path forward. Where was he supposed to find that kind of money? Without any answers, he eventually found himself arriving at Zhu Mei Mei's mansion. The scale of the estate no longer intimidated him. He felt different now, more experienced, more hardened. She welcomed him onto a velvet sofa with a shy smile, genuinely happy to see him and completely unaware of the storm of debts and pressure weighing on his shoulders. Siley got straight to the point. He needed a job. Pleased by his attitude, Zhu Mei Mei suggested that he have dinner with Liang Lian after class. The discomfort immediately returned. That wasn't his priority. He explained that the mother of a close friend was seriously ill and that he urgently needed to raise enough money for a life-saving surgery. Though visibly annoyed by his initial refusal, Mei Mei quickly found a compromise. She offered to pay him generously if he would simply keep her daughter company during dinner. Curious, Siley asked why she was being so generous. Mei Mei avoided giving a direct answer, but before rushing off to work, she finally revealed the truth. She believed that if her daughter spent time with him, she might finally become a happier person. Siley remained where he was for a moment, quietly processing the responsibility that had just been placed on his shoulders. Then he headed upstairs toward the meeting. The moment he reached the second floor, he stopped in surprise. What had once been a messy den covered in graffiti and clutter now looked spotless. Everything sparkled with cleanliness. He paused in front of Leon's bedroom door, a soft pink design accented with decorative ironwork, and stepped inside. The room was immaculate. Sitting at a desk near the window was a young woman who looked almost like a completely different person. The moment she noticed him, she turned with a sweet smile and jokingly asked how he had failed to recognize her. Siley sat down on the sofa, maintaining his serious demeanor, and offered a playful jab. He remarked that girls her age were usually overflowing with energy, and that seeing her so calm and composed felt strangely out of character.